Well, I do, no, I do.
He's
but
an abhorrent human.
I can't, yeah, I can't, I don't like so many of the things he does. I would have voted for him. But I guess the thing is,
Well,
maybe somebody, they have something to offer somewhere, although I don't know.
well, yeah.
But I don't trust him.
No, he's a narcissist. He's completely.
Yeah.
We have some more alternative. 3 to 5 million engagement votes cost him the popular vote.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell it to somebody.
Illegal.
Tell it to somebody who cares.
Oh, this is what he's.
Yeah,
He lies. So
No, it's not lies anymore. It's called alternative facts. Alternative facts.
That's right.
In other words, made up. Yeah, made up to suit.
In other words,
But he did it all the time. So I don't know.
no, why would we imagine?
If it's,
I could have put.
all the women, they all
I went to Seattle in March. Me and 149,000 others. That's right. How could you?
And in Boston, they don't know, they just know it was the biggest crowd they ever had. The police just said they thought it was peaceful.
and it's going all over Facebook. So people put it to say who's there so they can actually get a feel for the numbers.
Although, I don't even know why he counted the numbers, for non-Canadian, because really,
That was
yes, Obama had a lot, would you not have expected a mass turnout for the first Black American president?
But that was at his first, inauguration.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
inauguration.
yeah. So, I mean, of course you would have expected that.
So, but there was a lot of.
Say, it's to be expected, bigger voters, but always right down to the glass, and that's why it
Why wouldn't you just send a lot of people now, support environmental issues, just watch, quiet the media. He's so worried about the rain.
I've heard him referred to as a narcissistic sociopath. That about sums it up.
He's very hard-headed. Doesn't bode well.
Well, I'm so disgusted by his approach to and treatment of women, for one thing.
But he does hire women.
Oh,
What
kind of
really
women?
good.
All rise.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our regular meeting of Council. Our Councillor Murdoch will be a few minutes late, but he'll be here shortly. This is the second time, I just wanted to acknowledge the statement that we will have on all of our agendas, and that is the acknowledgement that the lands on which we gather is the traditional territory, coast, and Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. So that will be a standard on all of our agendas, all our regular meetings, and there we go. We have an amended agenda tonight, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. And to begin with, we have minutes and reports that we need to adopt. The first one is of council meeting on January the 9th, please, which is item 2 on our agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. The next item, item 3, Committee of the Whole from January 16th, please. Moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Item 4, the special council meeting, which was held on January the 9th, 2017.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And finally, item number 5, which is a special committee of the whole, our strategic priority session held on January 13th.
Move acceptance of the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Only have one announcement tonight, and that is to recognize the actions of one of our firefighters. This isn't the first time that we've been able to recognize a firefighter who off-duty acted quickly and decisively in order to save a life. And I'd like to certainly recognize the firefighter, Jason Joynson, who was very recently, in fact, before us for a long service medal. And firefighter Joynson was on his way home from downtown when he was near an intersection, and he noticed that a man had succumbed to some form of seizure. He was able to apply his training, immediately went into action for CPR, and as a result, the gentleman was able, although unconscious, arrived at the hospital alive. So our thanks to him, and I think it really is an example, again, of the kind of dedication and training that our firefighters have, and we're very proud of our firefighters and our fire department for that. That's my only remark. My next is public participation period. I want to remind anyone who, is there anyone who wishes to address us today? Okay, so I'll go through the routine. And it's a 20-minute period, maximum 3 minute per person. You will be video streamed and also video captured, in the sense that all of our video recordings of the meetings are archived, streamed live and then archived on our website. And what you're asked to do is, when you come forward, if you wouldn't mind writing your name on, there's a little list there so we have the correct spelling. Also write your community that you're in, that you live in, and when I say welcome, that starts the 3 minutes, and it would be of assistance if you tell us just the topic right off the top, so we have it in our mind what kind of issues that we may be listening for. All right. So, will the first person come forward, please? I think that's you, Tony. You just state your name.
Before you, Anthony Mears, South Oak Bay.
Yeah, that microphone has to go a little closer, because otherwise they won't
Yeah,
hear you.
well, I'm
Yep,
just gonna
you can
write
go
my
ahead and
name.
write there. Counselor and part-time technician, Counselor Braithwaite on duty. All right.
Okay, before you start the starter pistol or fire it, I've only had 3 minutes. I wanted to deal with, it's actually an item 8, but item 8 is not going to allow the public to speak, so I'm going to speak to it now. And I have a submission here that
Okay,
I've got a copy for everybody.
thank you.
I
And
don't
that
know
can,
how we'll do that.
you can circulate that.
And also
Yep.
an
Okay,
extra copy for the clerk.
good. Okay. With that, I welcome you.
Thank you. Okay, I want to deal firstly with the report that you have on that item. And it talks about a residential infill strategy. And it says that in the spring of 2016, Council embarked on a process to engage the community on the potential development of a residential infill strategy. I don't recall any public engagement. The only, I know that the residential infill strategy isn't actually a residential infill strategy. It's a terms of reference for a planning process to develop one. So basically, the only public engagement I recall was at UVEC, and I think and the only information provided there was design design of infill. And I think that was billed as starting the conversation about infill. So that's the only thing that's been on the table. So I think this report, from that perspective, is not accurate. The second thing I want to say is regarding the three recommendations from the Advisory Planning Commission. I was at that meeting, and so was a number of other residents, and I've checked with them. That's why this submission is so late. They confirm what I want to say, and that is that those three recommendations are not standalone recommendations. The first recommendation made at that meeting was about a residential infill strategy, a housing strategy. And the other two were sort of add-ons, and they were told that they had to be more specific. So you can't just pick one of those three out, as the report indicates. I think the other thing is that I think you should wait for the minutes of that meeting to make a decision on this and table it otherwise. Because I think any interpretation, whether it be mine or any other interpretation of what the commission wanted to do, would not be accurate unless you hear from the commissioners themselves, or you read the minutes, because that's exactly what they said. I think pretty well that wraps up what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mears. And we'll bank the 30 seconds for another time.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else wish to address us? Anybody else wish to address us? Anybody else wish to address us? All right. I'm going to move on now. And we're going to actually get into the topic that Mr. Mears referred to. And in fact, tonight I've invited the chair of the Advisory Planning Commission, Ms. Copley, to address us on the very issue raised by... Time's up, Mr. Mears. On the very issue raised by Mr. Mears. And then we also have a report from our Chief Administrative Officer with the three motions. This, if you may recall, was the subject of some discussion at the priority session as to which of the OCP implementations we wish to undertake over the next 2 years. And we do have some options. This is we do have a recommendation from our APC, or Advisory Planning Commission, and to give it a little more context, a little more meaning, Ms. Copley was invited here to have a conversation with her, to hear from her. She has been kind enough to provide a background report, which we have added to us now to our agenda under the words addenda. Yes, and that is a piece of correspondence we also have reference to. So I would ask Ms. Copley to come forward and address us on respect of these issues. And obviously some of the questions that we have and we will have is why we should go in this direction as opposed to another direction. And we did start down the road of looking potentially at an infill strategy and started that process. And we asked the APC to kind of do a reset review for us, and I think coming out of that with these recommendations. So if you could provide that context for the recommendations, and that would assist us in making a decision, which we're going to be asked for after this at the end of tonight. What we're looking for, councillors, is to have some kind of direction to our staff as to where we want to go and how we incorporate that into the priorities for the next 2 years. So welcome, Ms. Copley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I believe you do have a copy of my rationale before you. You may not, however, have had much of an opportunity to digest it, as it was just sent to you today. So with your indulgence, what I'd like to do, and also for the benefit of the members of the public who are here, is just go through it as quickly as possible.
And that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. And I think to Mr. Mears' questions to that point, we in fact have considered a few of those points quite in depth, and I believe there might be some responses that he would welcome in the rationale that we're presenting tonight. So first off, I'd just like to begin by saying that the APC was asked by Council to guide the process to help reset the infill strategy that was begun last fall, I guess technically last spring. But it didn't quite go according to plan, I think it's safe to say. It is a complex issue. It is related to the OCP, but there was a bit of there were a few things I think that perhaps we could have done a little bit better, and we're working very closely with the planner and with other members of staff to try and address some of those early issues, and hopefully we will be able to move forward in a much smoother manner. So the allocation of this task is very appropriate given the APC's mandate to advise Council on matters pertaining to land use, community planning, and proposed bylaws. Part of that, of course, mandate also is supporting implementation of the official community plan. This task is a very significant and sizable one. We were a little overwhelmed at the beginning, but welcomed the task nevertheless, because it's a very important one. And we've been working towards a set of recommendations since November 2016. So, and most recently, APC members pulled together under significant time pressure in order to respond to Council's request that we provide our recommendations in time for their recent strategic priorities session. And the following provides the context and rationale for the APC recommendations you have before you. We recognize that a little bit further explanation is going to be valuable in helping you make your decision going forward. It should be acknowledged that considerable time has passed since Council unanimously approved the OCP in 2014, and it would serve the community well to be reminded of the context, history, and general direction for development of a housing strategy and infill options coming out of the OCP process and survey results. Strategic public consultation is critical to the process going forward, as anticipated from the OCP survey results, as are community education and communication of the steps in this process. A comprehensive communication strategy will facilitate a fuller understanding on the part of the public and why this is needed. So we do recognize that public engagement is a very important component to this process. The most recent discussion, or actually since November at the APC, focused on existing versus future housing needs and options, and immediate versus longer-term strategies to enable housing diversity. There are several reasons why moving forward with a housing strategy and options is timely. The current regional rental shortage and now confirmed increased pressure on the local housing market due to offshore and other investment provides a strong motivation for Council to have strategies in place to help manage this situation proactively. That's certainly been the case in other communities as well, Vancouver most notably. It will provide a plan and framework for expansion of housing options to meet a diversity of needs and demographics that many of our community are requesting and have been requesting for some time. It is a key action identified in the OCP and fulfills the Provincial Local Government Act requirement to provide the type and context for residential development to meet anticipated housing needs. Through objectives contained in the OCP, it also relates to specific CRD growth strategy objectives to keep urban development, and I quote, keep urban development settlement compact, create safe and complete communities, and improve housing affordability. And these were noted most recently in Ms. Jensen's report from December 9th Council agenda. So that was very timely. It will be an important planning tool, and finally, I should say, it will be an important planning tool for existing and future residential growth and development in our community. Based on work already undertaken during the OCP renewal process, on policies contained in the Council-approved OCP, and from the more recent infill strategy comments sheets responses, there are steps Council can and should proceed with immediately. It makes sense to first work with existing housing to enable regulation of alternative housing options where we know there is considerable public support for moving forward. To develop a policy and regulatory framework to permit secondary suites, and again in quotations, is one of the short-term implementation actions in the OCP. To this end, regulation of secondary suites is the most logical first step to take, given that broad support in the community has been demonstrated through the OCP survey results, and that averages about 70% support for regulation of secondary suites, and about 65% on average for duplexes, and more recently through responses to the infill housing comment sheets. We are one of only 2 municipalities in the region that have not regulated secondary suites, and I did check with planning and building staff on that number. But these could, if regulated, provide a legal, affordable form of rental housing that already exists and can be regulated for safety and parking. Many precedents for secondary suites policy exist in the region and can be adapted for Oak Bay. OCP survey results also revealed significant support for updating the zoning for existing legal non-conforming duplexes. In future, this does not preclude consideration of heritage conversions and other options in existing housing. So why a housing strategy? Simultaneously with the above, considering with the possibility that Council may move forward with the first 2 motions, the APC is recommending and is prepared to guide the process to develop a housing strategy. And this will take place over several months or possibly even a year or more. The strategy or action plan can be a supplemental document to the OCP outlining how a local government will respond to its community's unique housing needs. For Oak Bay, this is really about enabling or developing housing options for residents, current and future, who may not be able to access or are not in a position to maintain a single-family property in our community. And we've heard from many, both through the OCP process, through the residential infill comments, and just anecdotally on the street. The primary goal is to create desirable and acceptable housing options that respond to community needs and at the same time respect the integrity and streetscapes of our established neighborhoods. This is articulated in the OCP vision and policies and informed by the OCP survey results. And I would refer you also to page 77 of the OCP, where the housing objectives and housing policies for the community are very clearly spelled out and align very much with the motions that are being put forward tonight. The 2014 updated OCP provides high-level, broad direction on housing for the district for the next 10 to 20 years. The overall housing needs of our community can be effectively articulated through a housing strategy, which could help focus and better communicate the rationale for new housing alternatives or redevelopment of existing housing options, and Oak Bay's plans for addressing our future housing challenges. Typically, a housing strategy provides the overall context and rationale for a community's housing needs and identifies and addresses the full range of housing options, with infill representing a component of the broader housing strategy. So a first step in developing a housing strategy would be to gather the appropriate data as per the indicators on page 162 of the OCP. And that is embedded in the third motion that we've put forward. And also to refer to the OCP survey results to inform the strategy, the housing strategy. So we've already got a significant body of information, but certainly having the indicators spelled out and kept timely. I think we've really not done that to date. This is a good time to start. This is a good reason to start. So that would be, that's a very strong part of our recommendation. So with the, and I think regarding the motions themselves, I've provided just a brief rationale. And I think, again, to Mr. Mears' point, they're really not meant to be considered in isolation. He's quite right about that. Now, of course, I understand that any or all of these motions would have to align with the strategic priorities, with the availability of staff resources and budgetary allocations if necessary. So we're not suggesting how this should happen. We're just suggesting that these would be a good thing to happen. So undertaking the regulation of secondary suites, again, there's been significant rationale and data gathered on why this is something that the community wants. And so Council really already has a mandate to move forward based on those numbers and the recent infill comment sheet responses. Considering the undertaking the development of zoning appropriate for existing legal non-conforming duplexes. I think I've used the incorrect term here. I said multifamily, but really it's a form of infill. Is that correct, Ms. Jensen? Duplexes? Yes, thank you. Okay, so let's just rephrase that. One of the forms of existing infill housing identified as desirable in the OCP that is not currently positioned. We have duplexes in the community, many. There have been no new ones built since, I think, the 60s, if I recall correctly. People are asking for them. Let's update the zoning and make them usable, affordable, upgradable, etc. That's really the intent of this motion. And they could be affordable housing alternatives for first-time homebuyers or for seniors wanting more manageable housing, but still wanting to live in this community. So those two motions really are something that we felt that Council could move forward with because of the data that's already available, because really a regulating is something that Council is mandated to do. And in the meantime, and as you will recall, I'm suggesting that simultaneously the APC can be working towards developing a housing strategy. So I think that the intent of this message is that there's work for all of us to do. You don't have to wait for us. We shouldn't have to wait for you, but we should be in alignment with how we move forward. That would be my. I think that's the message that would be important to carry forward, and certainly was a foundation of the discussion at the APC. So, and having the benchmark data from the indicators would be a very valuable piece of information to put forward towards the housing strategy as well. So that's essentially the rationale that we've come up with. And I would invite questions or comments at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Copley. So just maybe I could start just in terms of so we understand. 1 and 2, that's we can call it the secondary suites one, and the duplex one is number 2. Do you see us being able to do that, assuming, I mean, it'd be nice to have unlimited resources, but doing that in sequence, in other words, getting going on the suites question, and then followed quickly by the duplex issue? Do they have to be in tandem, or can they be sequenced one after the other?
Well, again, really, that's up to Council to make a decision on.
That's not something that...
It's not something, I would say that 1, 2, and 3 are not meant to be consecutive. They can work together. 1 and 2 can be worked on while we're doing while the APC is working on the housing strategy. So because there was insufficient time to really flesh out the rationale and the timing of the motions that we put forward, this is the time to have that discussion and those questions answered. So, and further to that, I would say that you would really need to have input from staff to understand what their availability is, time, etc.
Okay.
And yeah, and so it's not. These are desirables. These are we would like to see these happen, but we understand what the constraints are.
Okay.
And we are also putting the message forward that we're very, very willing and ready to work towards the housing strategy. The APC, the members of the APC will take that on. Of course, there still needs to be staff support, and that's fully understood as well.
Now, Ms. Koning, maybe I could just ask you a quick question here. Assuming if council were to want to go down the road that's been suggested here, the suites motion, the duplex motion, and the gathering data, is the next step for us to ask for a report as to how staff would be able to handle this, and in terms of resources, in terms of timing? Would that be something that we should do before we make a final decision?
Your Worship, we have that included with all of our priorities that are before us. We came back to council and gave some indication in terms of staff resources or budget implications. We need to do the same for these three. I think that we sort of saw that as being a final decision during the estimates time when council considers the implications of that whole list on what that means in terms of the budget.
All right. Thank you. Now let's just go around and see if there's questions, first of all, and then we can follow that by comments. But just, I think we want to maybe focus to begin with on questions for Ms. Copley or for staff that was raised. Okay. Anybody? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Murdoch, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. My question was weighing the pros and cons of this and looking at the option of going with secondary suites. How many secondary suites and where?
You mean how many should be regulated?
How many should be approved?
Well,
How many should be-
what we're referring in here to are existing housing options. So the ones that we already know are there, that have not been regulated and that we cannot regulate in terms, or the municipality cannot regulate. They're not legal, therefore we can't regulate them in terms of safety and parking and other considerations. So again, I think generally, as I mentioned earlier in my rationale, the APC discussion focused on existing versus future, and secondary suites can be both. So we could deal with the ones that exist now. We can deal with policies to establish and monitor and manage future secondary suites. That could come through the housing strategy. And the same, I would say, is for duplexes. But the certainly from the comments that I've heard around the community and through the various surveys and comments, sheets that I've already mentioned, there is a strong support, there is significant support for moving forward in some way with consideration of regulation of existing secondary suites and existing duplexes, or updating that zoning, I guess I should say.
So follow up to that then, the logic here is to regulate, to go through this process for people who have already put in secondary suites and just focus on those people in this term essentially, and then later on when people who maybe have more appropriate houses that using them, we'll start dealing with those people, or I'm trying to get a sense here.
Yeah, I think we already know that people are building new houses with the intent of someday using part of that house as a secondary suite. We all know people who have practically full suites in the basement, but they're not legally allowed to do that right now. Now, for whatever reasons, I don't know what their reasons are, but I do know that it is a mortgage helper for some. It's a place for families to live multi-generationally. I mean, there are a number of reasons why people find suites desirable, and the fact that they are contained, for the most part, within an existing structure means that there's very little impact on the neighborhood and the streetscape. And so what we're missing right now is that ability to monitor parking. And parking has been, when I was a member of the Secondary Suites Task Force many years ago, and continues to be around many other issues in the community of concern. So, but right now we can't really do anything about it. So this provides a vehicle, a channel for us to regulate, to monitor and manage those kinds of concerns.
And just so the question really here is, do we do that first, or do we look at the big picture and map out how many, where, what, where,
Yeah.
those sort of questions? That's essentially the dichotomy between those two
Well,
questions.
again, that's not my decision, that's your decision in consultation with staff. So I think perhaps maybe that's the kind of thing that could be referred back, or question that could be referred back to staff for some options in terms of moving forward.
Okay.
Again, if we make the division between, for now, just to get started, between what we know is already there and could be more effective in terms of providing alternative, affordable, rental housing, or all of the above, then that seems like the logical place to start. We've known for a long time there are 800 plus secondary suites in the community that nobody will say anything about, but they're there. And I think it would be, personally, and I think from people I've talked to, it would be better for them to be able to come out and be useful forms of accommodation in the community.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby next, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarity that you've brought with the report, and without having been to the APC meeting, not witnessing the discussion that took place, and then just receiving those three recommendations. You're right. It's very helpful to have your report to kind of flush that out for us. And I see that we can do both. We can trust that the APC can look at this housing strategy for us, begin that process of engagement and determining, demographic changes. Here overnight, there were 40 parents sleeping on the street, or sleeping on the stairs of Willows School because there are 40 people on a wait list for English and French immersion. Spaces that don't exist in Willows Elementary School right now. So that tells you a lot about the changing demographics within our community, that our schools are overrun with kids, and that the school district isn't prepared. But I don't want to be caught again, like the school district has been, without recognizing those changes in demographics and a change for different kinds of housing. We need to be prepared for those changes, and I think that a housing strategy now is an excellent idea. So I really support the idea that the APC begins that work for us.
Okay, we were going to try to focus on questions.
Sorry. And
Please.
But thank you for the comments.
Okay, I didn't realize we were asking questions, but I do have one other question then. So the regulation of secondary suites has been identified in the OCP, and you say that in the infill strategy, the initial process,
The comment sheets, that's right, yeah.
So
About that many
we weren't
in a binder.
I don't think we ever saw those. So it's interesting to hear that was that the similar responses were received from the survey and backs up that survey, as there was many people that did question the results of the survey, and so I'm happy to hear that there is also more evidence to support that survey.
Yes, well, just a reminder, the OCP survey was a statistically valid survey that was conducted throughout the community. The comment sheets responses that were gathered through the infill comment sheets were not. They were comments, and there was no particular rationale for how they were gathered. So, but yes, there is further. The feeling certainly at the APC table was that there were many similarities. Not all, but some confirmation that the directions were the same.
Thank you. We're focusing on questions. Councillor Ney, then Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Copley, for the overview and providing us this information from the Commission. It's very helpful. My question through you, Chair, is to staff, to our planner, Ms. Jensen. There's questions happening at the table, and it's leaving me a little bit perplexed about I'd like to understand better from you if we did refer this back to you, this motion that would include, let's say it was to include the secondary suites as well as the non-conforming duplexes. I'm wondering if you could tell us what you would provide back to us in terms of, like, would you be recommending doing these simultaneously? Would they be done in sequence? And second to that, around the secondary suites, if council did decide to move forward on that, what kind of a staff report would you provide us? Would it be about the process we would undergo to develop a secondary suite program? Or could you give us some insight into what kind of information you would give back to us? Thank you. Oh, that's
I think the first part I can answer, because I'm not sure that that's a fair question to the planner. I think part of it is we need to look at the priorities of council in its entirety, so we need to actually weigh that. And I'm not sure that I can just sort of single out or have staff single out just on those two, because we have a number of other issues that are on the priority list, of the heritage conservation area being quite a large one. I think that there's some support from council to consider that. So I think we need to see it in its entirety. We also need to see how the impacts of any one of these are on all of our staff, because it may be in other departments as well. So we haven't gone through or flushed out anything in terms of how we would go about doing that. That's part of us. We're waiting first to see if this is something that council wants us to embark in. Staff haven't looked at the how we would do.
through you, Chair. So that was in reference to my question that, what were you answering right there? Sorry. Was that about
So the
whether
first,
we would, yeah, go ahead.
So the first one is that there isn't anything coming back to council from the planner on the two specific issues. The first thing that needs to be addressed is how it is in its entirety in terms of the priorities. So I think that we need to look and then provide to council what the impact of that would be. That's what I was talking about earlier. If there's an impact in terms of how would we do that with the staffing resources that we have? Would we need additional staffing resources, or do we need another budgetary line? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And through you, Chair, if I may, thank you for clarifying the larger context in which we're working through these priorities, and this may be one if council moved it forward. I was trying to understand more hypothetically, if it was that we moved this forward and if council prioritized it, what it is that would come back from staff, so I can just understand what the planning expertise would provide us in terms of information about how this would be either sequenced, come in one by one, and the kind of information in the staff report around secondary suite programming. Because this is, for an example, just to where my question's coming from, I've heard one of the councillors ask, how many secondary suites would we be regulating? And in my mind, the way I'm understanding this, I don't think that's for us to answer. I would be hoping that we would get some sort of guidance from staff about a process that we would undergo to learn how to implement that secondary. But I'm not sure, so I'd like to ask our expert planner about that. That's where that's coming from.
So I'm not your expert planner, but I can start in terms of from the administrative perspective. So I'm not sure that we have clarity yet in terms of, I think that's what we're looking for council. Are you talking about, I think Ms. Copley sort of referenced that in terms of, are we talking about regulating existing suites? Are we talking future suites? That's what I think that we're looking for from council. So part of that is going to determine what that implementation strategy would be. So I think we're looking to you. We can come up with all sorts of scenarios, but we're also looking in terms of what is it that council wants us to consider. So if it's a component of that or both of them, we would come back with some sort of an outline, but we haven't done that work. And part of it is we're trying to weigh which of the priorities are council's priorities.
So to just put it in a nutshell, once we tell you what, you will tell us how, and I guess how much, which comes with the how. All right. I have Councillor, yes, thank you. Councillor Zelka's next, please.
Thank you, Chair. So through you to Ms. Copley, thank you very much to Copley, apologies, Ms. Copley, to you. Thank you so much to you and to the Commission for all the incredible work that you've done on getting us to this point. Thank you so much for all of that. I'm most concerned about impacts in particular. I understand the sort of the three suggestions that are moving forward. And I'm very intrigued with what you're describing as an overarching housing strategy with options. And the reason why I'm very intrigued with that is that it sounds a little bit more than what was kind of alluded to in the OCP. The OCP housing strategy section, when I go back to it, it basically says, and I quote, "Prepare a housing strategy identifying opportunities to encourage and support affordable and special needs housing, including housing options for the community." Now, I presume housing options for the community is the piece you're referring to here, not really the affordable and special needs portion. I'm sure maybe on the next page there's more, but it actually goes into something else on the next page. So the question I have for you is that on the overarching housing strategy, are you really referring to something that touches on the type of secondary suites, the location of secondary suites, maybe some ways of regulating it, some touching on other aspects of multifamily and the zoning and the infill and the conversions? Are you basically touching on all of the housing options?
I think that referring to one page in the OCP with regards to housing is not sufficient. There are housing references throughout the OCP, and I've gone back through many of those, and I use those as the foundation for advising and discussing with the APC about the recommendations that we put forward, and I've also tried to incorporate my knowledge of the OCP both through my personal experience and my refreshing my memory by going back through the relevant sections. So it's not just one page, and I don't think you can really consider what a housing strategy is in isolation, because there are many references to what the housing objectives are, and part of that is a housing strategy, and I again refer you to page 77 of the OCP, and I think it spells it out quite clearly. And again, I would say that what we are proposing as motions going forward is very much in alignment with these housing objectives, which could very well become part of our housing strategy and would certainly be a place to start and a foundation.
If I may, Chair. So thank you. I really appreciate that, because in previous questions that I've tried to ask to flesh out what is a housing strategy as kind of alluded to, thank you. But when like a year or two ago, when I've asked these questions, what I got back was essentially, it has to do with affordable housing and disabled people. I'm going like,
that's part of it. That's part of it, an important part,
so
yes.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. It's
Thank
actually
you.
much more than that. It's relating specifically to the, broadly to the objectives. And it really is the big picture is the impression that I'm getting in terms of how we can fulfill
we
those
believe
objectives.
the place to start. Yeah.
So I appreciate that, because that sounds like, with respect to what would help me make a decision, is that what we would get would be the impacts of these application of these housing objectives, potentially in terms of where and maybe in which neighborhoods it might be appropriate and how it might be different in different neighborhoods. I would hope that eventually we might get a larger, shall we say, a more detailed plan.
Absolutely.
Maybe even a neighborhood OCP type thing.
And that would be very much, as I've said in my preamble, further consultation is absolutely needed, and that is clarified many times in the OCP, and in particular reference to established neighborhoods and the 5 neighborhoods that were surveyed. Yes, there is more consultation and engagement that's needed, but we have good data to start that process.
So I'm relieved and feel that something like a housing strategy is in very good hands with the APC moving forward on something like that as a way of helping bring back, certainly from a policy perspective, some impact aspect. Now,
could I ask you what you mean by impact?
Yes. For example, let me refer to your items 1 and 2, or just secondary suites, for example. What worries me about proceeding, for example, with item 1 with respect to impacts is that if we simply legalize the existing regulation or of existing secondary streets wherever they happen to be, my worry is that we won't have a land use application, because what we're regulating then or authorizing at that point possibly is something pre-existing where we didn't have any input in terms of its location, for example. That's what I mean by impact.
But they're already there. I mean, that's the thing with the secondary suite. So again, if I'm going to refer you to page 79 of the OCP, H10, which actually does talk about a proposed process for regulating secondary suites. And it's not just, boom, regulated, done. There is a process that's being recommended. So it's all there. We would go back to that and we would follow that, you know, within reason and as faithfully as possible. So there is a lot of information, and I would refer you to that, just again as a refresher. I had to do that myself,
and I very
and
much
it's good
appreciate
information.
I very much like our OCP. It's a very well-written document. With respect to item 1 on the secondary suites, one of my concerns, and I want to ask you about this, is that what I like today with respect to our existing regulation of secondary suites, effectively we do have them regulated, they're outlawed. For those who have chosen to be outside the bylaws of Oak Bay, effectively what I like about it is that in effect, it seems to me, and I'd love your opinion on this, is that we seem to have, shall we say, self-regulation. For those who decide to abuse the potential privilege of the nearby neighbors, it seems to me that those generally seem to get shut down. But for those who don't, they generally fly under the radar, shall we say. Apparently, you've given a number of the number of existing secondary suites. I don't know how you've been able to get that number. I've not been able to count them, but
Heard it many times. I can't
I've heard the
verify
number
it.
repeated many times too. My only reference is Oak Bay News has repeated it, so therefore it must be true, because we all know CNN is the only source of fake news.
We're well aware that there are differing opinions about secondary
Yes,
suites
there
and
is.
their regulation in the communities. But when I refer back to both the Infill comment sheets responses,
Yes.
as well as the data from the OCP, there is a lot of support, 70% plus, for moving forward with some kind of a process to regulate. So secondary suites, so that says to me that the community wants to see these above the radar. So that's how I interpret it, and that's how I have interpreted the comments that I've heard over the years. That's how I'm reading it in the OCP.
I thank you very much for the information about the surveys, and I absolutely have looked at those surveys, and yes, the numbers are there. But again, I go back to the impacts. With respect to item number 2, one of the things that I've heard raised with respect to a potential impact, and I would love maybe the housing strategy might touch upon this, is once we provide the legal mechanism for making these legal non-conforming duplexes now legal, would there possibly be a rush to convert to strata, which might possibly put people out of their rental suites? So I don't know whether that might be a worry about an impact. I'd be very curious to see about maybe experiences from other municipalities where they legalized and then saw what happened. Because you can imagine owners of those buildings might suddenly realize, oh, there's a new land use possibility here. So I would love to know about that before we rushed into something like that.
Well, and I can't answer that. I can only refer to the comments that I've heard, both from our planner and from others, and from people who want another type of more, I'm not saying affordable according to the legal definition, but more affordable than our $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 single family homes. And it's climbing, as we well know. So the opportunity to buy half of, yes, and you're right, rental, conversion from rental to strata, it's a significant concern. I acknowledge that. I don't have an answer for it. I don't know quite how it works. I don't know if it can be regulated otherwise. Again, those are questions that would be best referred to staff or to people that have been through the process, to another community, for example, that has that information. But it has the potential to be a more affordable type of housing for people, young people, families wanting to set up, not wanting the responsibility of a full-scale, full-priced, single-family property in this community. So it seemed, and what we're saying here is maybe, not just do it, but start the process. Find out more. Look to other communities. Start the process. See if this is a workable option for Oak Bay. That's really what we're saying through these motions.
Okay, so we're still on the question phase. I see there's a hand at the back there. Mr. Thomason, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to clarify about the duplex being rental currently and going to a strata. It is a subdivision. It's not a subdivision that the approving officer would approve. It's a subdivision that council must approve.
Okay, so we would have some control over it. Now, again, that's something that would be part of a report coming forward should we wish to explore the duplex motion. All right. So what now we've had questions, and I think what we need now is some kind of motion as to which. Oh, you have questions. Okay. Go ahead then. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. Through you, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Copley, for being on the hot seat. It almost seems answering all the questions.
On the other side of the table.
You're being
Your
very
experience.
articulate, so thank you. I'm not going to ask questions that have already been asked or touched upon, but the only thing I really want to touch on is I heard you say quite clearly throughout your talk that this was a sizable task. You were overwhelmed since you were offering under significant time pressure, and you didn't have the time to flesh out for certain information. So I'm wondering if you had had more time, what perhaps would you have come to us with? Because if that's different, then I'm wondering if we should be giving you more time.
All right, fair enough. Sorry, your first question was, overwhelmed. That was at the very beginning when we were presented with this binder full of comment sheets, and I saw the looks on the members' faces around the table. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do with all of this? And so it was really just at the beginning, before we'd started the process, before we had a bit of a plan of action to move forward and to get to the place where we are now. So I would say we were not overwhelmed throughout the process. At the beginning, yes, it was a bit daunting, but I believe that we managed the information that we were presented with quite well and managed to get to a place that is reasonable in terms of the motions we put forward. Timing, we had two workshop sessions and some discussion at one of our regular meetings as well. So it was over the course of 3 meetings. It wasn't just one workshop. It was over the course of 2 workshop sessions and a partial workshop session in combination with one of our regular meetings. So there was a significant amount of time over which we came to the recommendations that have been put forward tonight. And the time constraint at the end was that our final workshop was 2 days before your strategic priorities session. So what we didn't get a chance to do, I don't believe we would have changed the recommendations considerably. What you might have got was a bit more context and rationale, which is what I'm trying to provide to you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now, questions? Okay, go ahead,
So
Councillor Croft,
I
please.
just want to be clear that what you're recommending is regulation of existing suites and duplexes, and you're not talking about any new housing, and that's why you have not used conversion housing as a recommendation.
Oh,
I just wanted,
okay.
if you could touch on that.
No, there was certainly a little bit of conversation, but I would say not sufficient conversation around the table to bring forward a motion. But and again, so how I referred to that in my rationale was, if I can find it. Oh yes. So what we've put forward as a motion to consider the possibility of regulating existing duplexes, but that in future this does not preclude consideration of heritage conversions and other options, which, yes, there simply wasn't time to discuss, but could be in the mix. There is support through the OCP for some of the other forms of housing. Heritage conversions is certainly in that mix, as are townhomes. So no, we haven't included all the possibilities. We've just included a couple of the more obvious ones where we have fairly good data about the support that's existing.
Thank you. Questions? Was that any follow-up? All right. So I think we're ready for a motion. Should anyone wish to put one?
I'd move that we move forward with the recommendations from the Advisory Planning Commission as laid out in the memoranda from the Chief Administrative Officer.
Okay. And I would assume that implicit in that is that we ask staff, because that's the what, we would ask staff for a report as to the how. Is that implicit there, or do we need to add that? Would that be helpful to staff if we just add that on to the end? And we ask staff for a report as to how this can be accomplished?
Your worship, and then we can refer it to the estimates along with all of the other things so you can see it in context.
Okay. So you wouldn't see that coming forward until the estimates? The next step would come forward at the estimates? The how?
You mean the how of each, how we're going to implement each of these?
Essentially, whether or not this is in fact doable, and does it have to be sequenced? Do you need more, directions or specifics on 1, 2, or 3? Is it clear enough? In other words, coming back with a report prior to estimates that say yes, this can be done. We're putting together some costs, and the cost will come forward in April.
So I think the best way for us to do that is to provide that, but we need to do it in context of all of the other priorities. So you get a full report, because I think you need to see that in relation to everything else that you have, so that you can decide at that time if that's what you want to move forward to estimates or if you want to approve that.
So prior to the estimates, is that,
Yeah,
that's
we
what I
can
hear
do
you say.
that.
Okay.
We can do that.
All right. So just so we're understood that this will now generate a report back to us as to the steps and the process, and then the cost implications if we decide to balance the priorities in this way that we would proceed with this would be at estimates. All right. Okay.
May I add one more comment?
Typically not,
No,
but is it, if it relates to
It
the
pertains
meaning
to
of
the
these
timing.
motions, I'd hear you, or the motions that your commission had made?
The timing?
Okay, well, the timing is part
Yes.
of your motion. Go ahead then.
Yeah, and again, if it's possible to get that information well in advance of estimates, I think you're going to be better able to make an appropriate decision. So, and I think, myself and other members of the APC would be willing to work with staff if a further clarification is required in any way.
All right. So there was some furrowing of brows as to not understanding what those. So let's start with Councillor Kirby and Councillor Zelka, and then we're going to go around to see if there's discussion on the motion.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that it was my understanding that this item, residential infill housing, is how we called it in the first round of the strategic planning session starting in 2014. That existed on our list as a high priority. We wanted to achieve, implementation of the first recommendations of the official community plan. And then what I'm understanding right now is that now it'll be a discussion whether or not it's achievable in the final 2 years of our term, and whether or not we have to have a further discussion of whether that is part of our strategic plan for the next 2 years, despite the fact that it was on the list in the first 2 years and has been delayed. I'm concerned by the wording that that it might not be on the list already. I thought it was clearly on the list. It was just how, and you were asking for further detail, and I think we've given that by saying we want to start with these recommendations.
That's not my recollection, is that council was waiting to hear from the chair of the APC in order to make that decision. So that wasn't made. I think that's what is in front of you today. What that also means, just so I'm clear about this, is the strategic priorities document prior to this round of priority setting had infill in it. So in essence, what you're saying is you want to put the infill strategy project on hold and you're replacing it potentially, if this is what council chooses to do, to consider the secondary suites, to consider the duplex zoning, and to consider the beginning stages of a housing strategy. That, in essence, is what you're doing.
So replacing the infill housing strategy, yes, with these recommendations.
Yes, but you need to also remember that you have to do it in context of all of the other items that you've also decided on, the sessions that you've had with the facilitator, Mr. Nason,
Yes.
over the course of those 2 meetings.
I thought this was a part of that. I thought this was
Yes.
one of those priorities. So that, and we were just trying to determine tonight exactly how we were going to do that. So this is, so we're saying the same thing. It's just,
Great.
yeah, okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zelko, please.
Point of information, I'm, with respect to this motion, which may not be a motion yet, I haven't heard a second here, but.
Oh, no, it was,
but-
there was
and
moved
that's
and
fine, So
seconded.
we're still
It's
discussing.
on the floor.
There is no recommendation from staff. The motion was put forward as recommended by staff, but staff has not recommended.
So
But
if
not
you're gonna
recommended by
speak,
staff.
you're gonna need your microphone on, and I'm gonna need to recognize
So-
you, so no
so on a
off kind
point
of
of
microphone
information-
conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. So on a point of information, I just wanted to clarify exactly what the wording of the motion is, because I wasn't quite sure. That was number one.
Well, hang on, let's stop right there. Let's ask our, I was gonna say deputy clerk, but that's old language, Deputy Director of Corporate Services.
The recommendation that I have is to move forward with the recommendations from the Advisory Planning Commission as laid out in the Chief Administrative Officer's report.
Thank you.
Final point on point of information. I was hoping that we would have a chance to talk about the our Chief Administrative Officer's report before we actually got into motion, since she does talk about resourcing, and maybe that'll come out as a result of within the motion itself. But I was hoping we could talk about it beforehand. But okay.
Well, there is a motion on the floor now, so if you want to make some points at some, during this discussion, then that's the time to make it. All right. Thank you, Ms. Copley. You're welcome to sit down, and thank you. Really appreciate you coming here tonight. Now, let's see. Are there speakers to the motion? Thank you. I'm going to ask the person who moved it first, and then Councillor Murdoch, and then Councillor Zelka in that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. I see this as a logical next step in our work on the OCP implementation. I think we have a responsibility as local government to ensure the health and safety of our community, and that's what regulating of secondary suites would do. We also have several issues with parking, and there are various views on that, and that the only way to achieve any kind of consensus is to get out there and start talking to people and begin the engagement process about the zoning of duplexes, which already exist, as with the regulation of secondary suites. I do believe we can do both, and I appreciate that the APC can look at the housing strategy while staff tackle the long overdue regulation of secondary suites and the reintroduction of the duplex since the late 60s, I think it is. So I look forward to this.
Thank you. Just a small note, a little footnote about your comment about long overdue. We haven't given instructions to staff to do it, so.
I didn't mean it that the staff is overdue. I mean, as a community, I think we've fallen behind the rest of the region, and we've been talking about this for well over a decade.
Just wanted to make it clear that that's what the meeting was.
It's not the staff. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly, I think we suffer a little bit from lack of clarity about what the housing plan versus infill strategy versus housing strategy nomenclature actually means. I just want some clarification from Ms. Koenig again here. My understanding of this on the strategic priorities is we are taking off the infill housing, so we're not doing any planning piece of this. We are instead replacing the staff time to go and start the process of regulating secondary suites. And really, that's what we're going to set aside for the next 2 years to have done, so we can close off that aspect of things before the end of the term. Is that accurate?
So and for those of you who she didn't have her microphone on, the yes. Answer was yes. Thank you.
So I will then quote Ms. Copley, who said, the big picture is the place to start. And I have a real issue with going down this path, not for all kinds of just practical reasons on this. I think we'd get a lot more buy-in on secondary suites in terms if we had a plan to say how many we thought was reasonable, where we thought what they would look like as part of a bigger picture. I think we would have, I think we'd do our community a service by actually looking at all the housing options and trying to make, you know, we have one thing to do this year. I think from my look at it, we have an OCP which is broad, vague, very aspirational. It talks to having a housing strategy and a housing plan. I was hoping we'd have that in part of the OCP, but it was not to be happening. But I would like to see that brought down to a map where people can actually see on the map what our zoning planning is, where we anticipate seeing increased density. Are we going to do that by geographical region closest to commercial centers? Are we going to do it by districts? Are we going to do it by roadways? These are all questions I think that we can have very rational discussions about, and I think the community would buy into it a lot more fulsomely if we have that broader picture in place first, and then we start looking at, okay, so, you know, the area around Oak Bay Village may be an appropriate place to focus more on higher density duplexes, triplexes. We don't want to necessarily be encouraging secondary suites in that area, so because we want to actually achieve higher goals than what are being accomplished. So to my mind, I think this is backwards. I think we're sort of setting our sights way too low. It's easy to say we'll regulate them. The other thing I would say is that for us to actually get people to come forward, experience in other jurisdictions has been tough. It's been very hard to do. And again, if we have a plan that says we're trying to hit this many, that lets us set goals that say, okay, we're going to allow to start with, say, 500, and we're going to, the first 500 to come forward that meet the completes. We kind of have a little carrot and stick approach to kind of get people to come forward as part of it. So I can't support this. I don't think that setting our sights there, our entire goal after trying to do an entire residential infill strategy to say, well, just regulating secondary suites is good enough, just doesn't do it for me. I think we actually have to accomplish more. So I can't support the motion as it is. Hopefully it'll get defeated and we can move forward on a housing plan.
Thank you. Next speaker, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. In general, I have to agree with Councillor Murdoch. I cannot support the motion as stated. I am concerned on sort of a piecemeal approach. I'm concerned on regulating of secondary suites where they exist, since as a policymaker, don't have any input in the land use of that. I would much rather look at the larger plan first, and through a whole process decide, maybe in consultation with the community, where is an appropriate place for secondary suites, where is an appropriate place for moving forward with expansion of duplexes and conversions and heritage conversions, et cetera, et cetera. And I see that the overarching housing strategy with options as being the first step. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers, Councillor Croft, please.
Thank you. I will be voting in favor of the motion because I actually think that it's time that we move forward and dealt with the existence of unregulated suites in our community wherever they exist. And I also agree that we should have a zoning for these duplexes that used to have zoning. We're talking about existing. Out of the existing will flow a program of overarching housing policy that will then inform the community, and the community can then have a conversation about where they may want other kinds of housing in their community. I think that if we go down the road of a housing strategy, we'll be talking about this conversation 10 years from now. And I think that it's time that we dealt with what we have here, make it regulated, provide zoning for duplexes, and I would like to see the conversions follow along very quickly thereafter, because this is a way of protecting our built heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Croft. Councillor Ney, please.
I think it's pretty clear from the OCP that consultations that our community wants to move towards regulation of secondary suites. So we've got solid community feedback that that's the direction this community wants to go. In terms of where we regulate, the OCP survey provided us with information from the community about the number of members of the community who were in support of secondary suites in, I think it was 5 different districts. So we have a good base here as documented in the OCP that we can consider the beginning of secondary suites. And I mean, it's clear at the table here, there's some people that do not want to regulate secondary suites, that they feel it works just fine the way it does. But I feel very strongly that that we regulate them, because there's a lot of people who are relying on that income as another source to supplement their mortgages. It provides good housing for students and people on lower incomes, the secondary suites. And I am really tired of hearing the stories of families who own homes and have their secondary suite closed down, not because they've been a community disturbance, but because somebody doesn't like the way they cut their lawn. It's not warranted. And as soon as the suite is closed down, for no good reasons, not because they've been a bad citizen, it's closed down. And I've heard of families having to leave the community because they can no longer afford their mortgages. And I don't think that's a good way to treat our citizens. They need to have the certainty and security of the kind of income that's coming in to take care of their property and their families. And the way to do that is to regulate them. So I'll be voting in favor of this motion.
Councillor Braithwaite, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we're saying that secondary suites should not be regulated, and I kind of take a little bit of offense to your comment that you know, they're being unjustly treated if their secondary suite is closed down, because in actual fact our bylaw is being followed when a secondary suite is being closed down. But that's neither here nor there. I think that for me, I would tend to agree with Councillor Zelka and Councillor Murdoch in that I believe what we should do first should be a much more fulsome look at it. And it's not to say that we don't want to regulate secondary suites, but to look at it in such a way, as Councillor Murdoch said, in that, you know, perhaps in this area we have 100, in this area we have 200. Make it so it's community-wide and that people can buy into it a little bit more. So I'll be voting against the motion. Thank you.
For a second time, Councillor Murdoch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two quick comments. One, that it'll take 10 years. I think that's why I want to do it now. I think if we do a housing strategy now, we have to have it done by September of next year. It gives us a timeline and it forces us to actually have it done. If we wait till after the next election, new council, it may take another 10 years for us to actually start planning things out. So it's exactly specifically for that reason that I would rather actually have it done first. And the one point I failed to mention last time, and I should have, but is top of mind, particularly around the heritage community, is the whole notion of heritage conversions and the need to have a strategy for that, so we have some policies and we have some incentives in place so people actually do some conversions on these old houses. The duplexes are not the heritage houses being converted. They're all built in the 60s. So again, as part of a housing strategy, maybe we look at, I think that should be part of our urgent and necessary component of what we want to do next. By saying we're going to look at secondary suites, we're essentially saying to the heritage community, it's good enough, and maybe we'll get to a housing strategy in the future, which again, I have a bit of a problem with. Again, this is fine. We're having a reasonable discussion here. My personal opinion on this is that we're better off making some better planning decisions before going forward, and I would agree with Councillor Braithwaite. This has nothing to do with not wanting to regulate secondary suites. I think I've been very clear that I do want to regulate them. The question here is whether it's important, but is it urgent? And do we have something a bit more urgent that actually has a time frame to it that we should be getting to first? And I strongly feel that the housing strategy is the part that we're going to have a harder time getting to a time crunch on, and we can work through that as part of developing the secondary street regulations as they come forward.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby, please. And then Councillor Zelka for a second time, both.
I heard you say that it's easy to regulate them, Councillor Murdoch. So I appreciate that. It's the easiest first step. Let's get it done. And at the same time, part of my motion is that the APC begins the work of the housing strategy for Oak Bay. That's the third part. So they're going to start gathering data and doing some of the initial work that needs to get done. And I don't think that Council will achieve that any quicker than the APC. I think that as a committee, they're going to work hard and they're going to gather the data and they'll give us that information and recommendations that we need. And we may end up with a housing strategy before the end of the term. I'd love to see that. But I don't think that it's, we're not going to make the steps forward on that. I think we are making progress on all the above. The other thing is I think it is urgent that we address that because of the health and safety conditions that we need to address as for regulation. There are suites that are unsafe and those need to be regulated. And that's an urgent issue. There's also an urgent issue of rental housing in this region where we are at 0% vacancy. That is something that we need to address urgently. So that's why I think it should be our top priority.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take this opportunity to ask a question of the CAO with respect to her report. Through you, Chair, the last paragraph, Ms. Koning makes reference to how, I believe you talk about how existing staff resources will not allow the 3 initiatives recommended by the APC to be undertaken simultaneously. Could you please elaborate?
Again, I sort of go back to some of the other things that are on the council docket in terms of priorities. And so you need to see it in its entirety. I can't stress this enough. I think we talked about this in terms of the heritage conservation area as a significant piece of work. And so part of that is, again, we need to come back. We can't do it within the resources that we have. We have a director of planning and building. We have 1 planner, a planning tech, and we have some building inspection. That's in essence the department. So when I say that we can't do it within the existing resources, if council chooses and wants to have these 3 initiatives move forward, there will be some impact and there will be some request in terms of how we can do that, whether it's in a priority sequence or if it's in additional resources. That's something we would prepare for council to make a decision.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. The last thing I would like to see happen is for staff to be run off their feet where we as council provide staff with 6 or 7 or more number 1 priorities. I don't think that's fair. We are a small district. We can only do so much within our tax base. And I understand that there's a desire to move forward on everything right away, and I understand that we simply cannot, again, without running people off their feet. I'm still going to be voting against this motion because I would much rather have a plan that tells us and tells staff of course with the input of our residents and the planners, where is an appropriate place for these housing options. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll speak last. I will support this. We have been looking at the issue of secondary suites for approximately 7 going on 8 years. We are one of only 2 municipalities in the CRD that hasn't addressed it. The other one, I might add, is Highlands. They have different issues. They don't have water. They use wells. They don't have city water. And they don't have city sewers, so they use septic fields. So for them, it isn't so much a matter of policy, but just the reality of the carrying capacity of their community, as I understand why they haven't moved forward. We don't have those same issues here. Having now discussed it going on 8 years, as I mentioned, and having looked at it in the OCP process and having heard from our community the direction that they wanted to go, and now having had that reiterated by the Advisory Planning Commission, I think now is the time. We have the community support. We have the advice of our Planning Commission, which has worked through this. I would submit through their 2 workshops very carefully. We are double tracking it. I appreciate the concerns that Councillor Murdoch has, but I think because of the double track, that Council moves forward on one, and while at the same time the APC is working on another, I think this is eminently supportable. And it is, as I said, something that's been on our agenda for a long time, and it is something that we can deal with not easily. It's a complex issue, but we can deal with in the next 2 years, and I think we should. So, all in favor? I'd mentioned that I was going to speak
Wish
last.
to move a subsidiary motion?
There is no such thing as a subsidiary
A
motion,
table.
but
I
if
wish
it's an
to table.
amendment,
I wish to table the motion.
yes, they can do that.
I wish to table the motion until after we've seen the minutes of the APC. I don't feel I have enough information.
Okay, there's no seconder, thank you. Now, the question on the first, on the main motion, please. All in favor? Opposed? Braithwaite, Murdoch, and Zelka opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you very much, everybody, for the discussion, not only here, but at the priority session. This is a difficult area anytime you deal with land, and I think we've had a very fulsome debate, differences of opinion, and now we're going to move ahead. Thank you very much. Item number 9, the request for occupancy of a portion of Carnarvon Park for soft plastic recycling. This is an annual request that's come to us here.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved, and there's some dates that hopefully will go into our events calendar that show when there is soft plastic recycling at Carnarvon and other kinds of recycling, for that matter. Discussion. Yes, go ahead, please.
I just move amendment to this motion as laid out here. The December 23rd date listed in their application is missing from the motion as written here. So just.
I don't think that's an amendment as such. It's just a typo that was left off, right? So we'll
just
take
note
it as a
that so
typo.
our minutes
Yep.
reflect it.
So it'll be on. There'll be a December date to added in there. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Next is Willows Park, request for commercial activity. That's item number 9. This is Inspire Health Rain Walk. All right, how do they know it's going to rain on that particular day?
Approval.
But anyway,
Second.
that's another question. Moved and seconded, and is subject to a number of conditions, including such things as insurance. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. The Tea Party. We welcome our esteemed new president.
I must
that's right too. Yes,
recuse
thank
myself
you.
as I'm a director on the Oak Bay Tea Party Society board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We welcome Ms. Germain. Thank you very much. And Oak Bay Tea Party now is on its 55th year. Isn't that
Yes.
amazing?
55, and I haven't been here for all of them, so there you go. So this year, as it is our 55th, it's also Canada 150. We would like to, in addition to our regular grant and our occupancy application, request that we be able to have fireworks this year. If we are able to obtain the corporate funding that we're going to need in order to be able to pay for those. But the first process, of course, has to be that we're permitted to do this. This would require us to be open until 10 o'clock, as opposed to shutting everything down at 9. Fireworks would start at 10. Probably they last about 15 minutes, and then the clear out then becomes.
Okay.
So we had them on the 50th. We'd be looking at using the same company again. And it was a company that we used to have when we had them every year,
Okay.
actually.
Thank you. Is there any question, Ms. Germain? While people are thinking of questions, the recommendation, by the way, here it includes a line that with the insurance and everything, but also undertaking an application for a fireworks permit to the satisfaction of the fire chief. You're
Yes.
aware of that?
Yes.
All righty. So let's see if there's any questions. No questions. Let's see if there's any.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Saturday opening.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve this in accordance with the recommendation.
Do we
Ms.
need two motions, one for the Saturday opening and one for the grant? Is that appropriate?
One's
So the
one's
first
for
is
the occupancy.
First is, yes, the motion to approve and including the Saturday night opening.
Okay, so that's
Second.
the occupancy part. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, none opposed. Now the grant part, please.
Move the grant.
Second.
Thank you. Moved, seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, none opposed. Thank you very much, Ms. Germain.
Not done?
Well, we are, but we still welcome you
I
to
still-
continue.
Now, the Friday night for Shooting Star, this will be probably, I believe this is the 5th year that they will have been able to be open from 4 till 9 on Friday. Every year, we ask. My understanding is there have been no issues with it. The community likes it. Facebook, they love it. The kids with the wristbands. Do you think we're at a point where we could just say, okay for Friday nights?
Well,
Or are we gonna, every year, we'll keep asking?
well,
mean,
you'll
I'm
be back
fine
here
either
anyways
way.
for the grant request. That has to be done every year.
Okay,
What we could do at some point is delegate the authority to the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture, which we've done in some instances. But maybe that's something that you can leave with us,
okay,
and we can think about that. But as I said, you're going to be here every year because there's a money component,
yes.
and we can't say, okay, for the next 5 years, we'll give you X amount of dollars. So it has to be on an annual basis for that.
And for the fireworks, because this will allow Shooting Star to be open until 10, operate till 10. They will shut their ticket booths down at 9:30 as opposed to 8:30 and 9. Are we okay with that?
We're okay with, I think that it's set out that we're permitting these times, so
Okay.
I don't think it speaks directly to, maybe I missed it, does it speak directly to the shutting down of the ticket booth and everything? Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Your Worship. We included the application form that Sandy provided in your guys' agenda package. You'll also see on the note that the event request also proposes to operate amusement rides on Friday from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. So 10 p.m. would be the conclusion of the occupancy with respect to the amusement rides.
But
Okay.
we don't put conditions on when the ticket sales have to be cut off, or?
No, that's,
No,
Anything like that?
I think that's an understanding that could be worked out with staff if any concerns arose.
Okay, so it's not something that we need
Okay.
to put into the
Okay.
motion or anything of
All right.
that nature.
okay. Great.
Well, we wish you all the best.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to it. Now, the last on our main, no, quite last, sorry. Third to last. And this is the zoning amendment application. Just to give you, everyone a little context here, this has to do with the Cadboro Bay Road and Bowker Avenue proposal by Abstract. We heard from, we had a committee of the whole meeting last week. We went right till, I think, 11:15 or 11:20. We heard from the applicant. We heard from numerous speakers who lived in the neighborhood and elsewhere in Oak Bay. You may recall that one of the focuses was the issue of that intersection of safety and how it might, that safety issue might be impacted by the addition of these units. We then heard the last speaker, but we didn't give an opportunity at that point for, which we typically do, for the applicant to respond. And we put there was a motion put about referring this back to our staff. And that was deferred because we needed a little more time to discuss and reflect on what we had heard. We needed to hear the applicant's response also, which I think he's prepared to speak to tonight. Now, Ms. Jones, or Mr. Jones, one or the other, can we hear the applicant before we lift the, we should lift the motion first, and then we can go through the process? Okay, so we have...
Move to left.
Okay, so the motion was
Second.
was to refer to our staff, the whole issue, And it's been moved and seconded to lift it, and all in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. So now it's a live motion. One of the things, by the way, is, and we're going to hear from the applicant in a minute, but one of the things we want to keep in mind, I guess there's two things. One is, it's one thing to refer it back to the staff, but I think we, in fairness to the staff, we need to be specific. We want information on point A, we want information on point B, we want further research on point C. We need to be specific as we want staff to do. That's the first thing. And we may also want to consider things that we want the applicant to look at. Again, that has to be specific, and of course it has to be the consensus or the will of council, and not the individual councillor. So keep that in mind. So I think we're going to hear now from the applicant. Is there a presentation up on the screen? Now. All right, I think we're just warming up our screens. And we also have a document that was, we have extra correspondence which has been added, but we also have a multi-page document here so we can more easily follow along with the presentation. Yeah, I don't think that that clicker, I think they're on, but now we need to connect the computer to the system. And that's what might be holding things up here. There we go. It's when things aren't working. First of all, check to see if they're plugged in. That's very good. I think this should do it. There. Thank you very much. All right. As I said, we have hard copies of this for council. Give us a little easier to follow along. Thank you, Mr. Damon. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council.
Welcome back, I guess.
Thank you. So in order to keep things succinct, Abstract Developments has asked us just to speak directly to the information that's been submitted to you as additional to our presentation last week. And it's in response to some of the questions and comments we heard. We had questions from Council regarding FAR and the setback along Bowker. So I just have a half a dozen slides here. I can move fairly quickly through them. But the first slide shows you two diagrams, and there was a question, and I had made a comment in response about the FAR being the size of the FAR being a result of the triangular shape of the site. And there were constraints related to this, the fact that this was a sloping site and a triangular site that had impacts on the FAR. And this what you see is an attempt to kind of clarify how that works. On the left is the site as it exists now, the triangular site with a 4-story wing on Cadboro Bay and a 4-story wing on Bowker. And on the left would be an example of a kind of a more conventional right angle, city grid site. Now, at first glance, it seems, sort of obvious and somewhat disingenuous that, well, you take a bigger site and you put the same building on a bigger site, you're going to have a lower FSR. But what I would like to just try and point out is that if you start from the position that we do as architects, that in this sort of a context with the idea that this is a secondary village, that the building should shape and animate the street, that the building should address the frontage along both streets, then what you have is a built form that follows that frontage. Now, when that frontage is kind of compressed by the triangle, it compresses the site in behind, or the area in behind the two frontages, this sort of courtyard that we have here. If the building was a right angle, obviously that opens up. So just by way of demonstration, what we've done here is take essentially this property line and fold it open, and this property line and fold it open, and fold the building open. So you have the same building area. You end up with an FAR that is 1.65 compared to the 2.92. Now that's an arbitrary number. I don't mean to suggest that you should consider this building as having an FAR of 1.62, or 1.65. But I think the point is just to make that if the building was doing exactly the same thing with exactly the same length of frontage on a right angle corner site, you would have a very different FAR. And so that's the point of that. So really, as I say, the point of this was just to try and clarify the comments I was making, and hopefully it's a little bit more understandable on the basis of this diagram. The other question that we had was around the zero lot line setback on Bowker, and that again is a product of the fact that we have this triangular site, and we're trying to keep as much livability for the units that face the interior courtyard as possible. So we're pushed to the perimeters of the site, in addition to that principle of addressing the streets. So, and we made a comment about the right-of-way, the width of Bowker, the right-of-way being substantial enough to support a very small setback on Bowker. And by way of again, demonstrating that and what we mean by that, what you see here are some comparisons. So the upper pair of images is the rendering that we have of what our building looks like in its frontage on Bowker, and then a section on the left there through Bowker Avenue. You see our building 4 stories with the 4th floor step back. The red line is the property line. And then across the street, across Bowker, and you have the residential house on the other side. And we've also illustrated the sort of zoning volume that those houses or those properties can have. What you see is that sort of property line to property line, Bowker has a right-of-way of about 66 feet, which means that with the setback required by zoning on the right-hand side, you have a kind of a building-to-building distance of 92 feet, right? And what that does, that right-of-way is broad enough, it gives us the luxury of being able to push the landscape and pedestrian zone into the parking lane on Bowker. So we effectively have, and you can see in the diagram here, a relatively comfortable public pedestrian zone in front of our building, and then you start the sort of the traffic zone on the street. And we have just a couple comparisons here to, again, give you a sense of that scale. Directly beneath, we have Waterfront Crescent from the Selkirk area up in the Burnside Gorge neighborhood. On this street at Waterfront Crescent, what you're looking at on the left is a 6-story building. On the right is a 2-story building. And the Waterfront Crescent right-of-way, you get basically two-way traffic, 2 parking lanes, and 2 sidewalks in 52 feet of right-of-way. So that the building distance, the distance between the 2 buildings, is 82 feet compared to our 92 feet. And the photo gives you a sense of what the character of that street is like, and it's actually very nice. It's what it should be for a kind of a village-type setting. You have the street enclosed and shaped by the building faces, and you get that kind of public room, that public space. So that, we have 10 feet more than that in our right-of-way at Bowker. Again, another pair of examples. The top one is Menzies Street in James Bay, where similarly, again, you have a 4-story building on the left and a little commercial 2-story building on the right. It's more 1 stepping to 2 because of the slope. And again, we have on Menzies, you have about 85 feet between the 2 buildings. And then the second example, the lower example, is at Sutlej at the Cook Street Village, where you have about 89 feet between the 3-story building on the left and the houses on the right. And in all cases, really, the point of showing you these images is to say that we've looked at this, and this is the reason why we're comfortable to present a very small 0 lot line setback effectively on Bowker, because we have the frontage, we have the distance in the right-of-way to be able to create a very livable, walkable street section. And then we have 3, just to finish here, we have 3 renderings of the building kind of in context, again, just to assist further with a sense of how it compares scale-wise to the buildings around it. So the first is looking east on Cadboro Bay. this is the existing, that existing 4-story apartment building, and you can see our building here beside it in terms of, you can see the way it is set back to begin with, to be more contextual with that existing building, and then further down the street steps forward to address the sidewalk and the street frontage. The second rendering is looking east again on Bowker and showing at the right-hand side the existing 4-story building there with its big setback from the street and that broad sort of expanse of that, what I would call a no man's land of lawn in front of it. And you can see here the end of our Bowker wing, again 4 stories, and how it addresses the street. And again, when you compare that as a section and a perspective on that street to some of these others, I hope it gives you a sense of the context, the kind of scale that we're talking about, and precedent, right? And then the final image here is an aerial view, just taken from the sort of Google street maps, with the project photoshopped into that site. And again, you can see how we compare to the 4-story buildings on Bowker and Cadboro Bay, with the single-family residential across Bowker Street and the lodge up in the corner. So that concludes the additional information we wanted to provide. Hopefully that clarifies or illuminates some of the discussion that was being had. Thank you.
And I take it that's the sum total of your reply? Okay.
Yes,
or
correct.
response, I guess, is more appropriate. Let's see if there's any questions with respect to either the materials that we have just presented to us, or anything that arose last time that we didn't really get a chance to kind of debate and discuss. So, Councillor Murdoch, please.
Before we do that, I lost my. Before we do that, I'd actually just like to get a sense of process here, because I have quite a few questions, and council isn't the ideal place to have these conversations. It's kind of an awkward give and take here, going through you, Chair, to direct questions. I just answered some and rose more, so there's quite a bit, and I don't think I'm quite prepared to give direction in terms of sizing and so forth necessarily. And I think, in fairness to the applicant, I would like to have a chance to ask the questions in fullness. We didn't get through all the questions last time because we were pressed for time, which I understand, but I'm just trying to get a sense here of what we're trying to accomplish, because if we're trying to nail this down to make directions as to make changes to the application, if any, then I think that's going to take quite a long time. And I think it needs a fairly fulsome back and forth discussion. And if we're just trying to, I'm a little leery about what we can get through today, unless we're settling in for an hour or two of work here to get through as much like we had at the Committee of the Whole.
Okay, so I see the objectives as one, as I mentioned before, giving specific instructions to the kind of information we want staff to gather for us, and two, asking the applicant to go away and make certain or consider certain changes. If we don't feel that we can get to those tonight, or we can delineate them sufficiently, then I think the option that we have is to bring it back to a Committee of the Whole. So there may well be some questions for the applicants as to why you did A or B that may need to, the applicant may even need to go away and think about before they respond. And that, I think that response can come at the next Committee of the Whole, or a Committee of the Whole, when the staff is ready and when the applicant is ready to bring those back. So if we don't feel that we're in a position at this point tonight to get through all of the issues that we want the applicant to address, then the option is for someone to move the item back to the Committee of the Whole. Right now, the motion we have in front of us is to send this to staff. I think that's the motion, Ms. Jones, just to send it back to staff. But with that needs clearly more direction than just that. And then there can be a second motion with respect to what the next steps are. That we may be ready to, for instance, we may have some idea of maybe 1, 2, and 3 items that we want the applicant to consider, and we may want to put X, Y, and Z ideas back to the committee of the whole. I think that would that kind of work if we went about it that way, Jones and Jones? Jones and or Jones? All right, let's try that. So Councillor Murdoch has the floor.
I'll get into it, but I think that probably Councillor Kirby wants to talk to some process here as well, so let's talk about that
on
first.
the process issue, thank you very much for ceding the floor.
Thank you.
Councillor Kirby.
I'm just, I'm not sure that we haven't voted on the motion, and there was no discussion of the motion that the application be referred back to staff to continue negotiations on the proposed development. And I'm wondering if that discussion might occur now, because I disagree. I think that the neighborhood, the neighbors, immediate adjacent neighbors, and the entire street on Bowker, there wasn't any opposition. So the opposition came from other parts of the neighborhood, other parts of Oak Bay. And so for me, it's not a question of referring it back to another council meeting or, committee of the whole, or sending it back to staff for further negotiation when the collaborative efforts of the community that live in the immediate
I
vicinity
think you're now
already.
Getting into a discussion of the merits of which is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think we're at that stage yet. I think we're still at the questioning stage.
Well, that's why
of the applicant.
I'm confused as to why we would. I obviously, in the position of chair of the committee of the whole meeting, was unable to fully participate or make a motion or participate in the debate. So that's where I feel like now I may have that opportunity to express that I'm not interested in further discussion.
So when the vote comes on the motion that we have on the floor, you can vote in accordance with your
Certainly.
views.
Well,
And then if there's a second vote that has to do with next steps, and again, you can express your views there.
but I would like to have that discussion before we get there. I mean, I don't think that we're fully there yet ready to vote on the motion. But
No, I don't
would
think
like
so
to have
either.
further discussion. Okay.
So
that's what we're going to have now.
no, we're going to have questions now of the applicant based on what we've heard here tonight and other things. Once we finish that phase, then we'll have a debate on the motion. Okay? And any amendments to the motion. But not and then amendments to the amendments potentially. But that's as many as we're allowed. We checked the procedural bylaw today in anticipation of the amendment to the amendment. So, Councillor Murdoch, you have the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and maybe just leave this to questions. Maybe we can't get to all of them, and they can come back as more as a presentation at a future committee of the whole. I really do think that's where we have to get to. And I take Councillor Kirby's point that there may be some desire to move this forward. I think that's part of the questions here to see if there are still outstanding questions that need to be answered before we get there. And I would just make the observation that I think the applicant's done a fantastic job of reaching out to all the neighbors and going through an interactive process with them. They are not land use experts. They've gone through that process with them. We still have a job to do. We still have to look at this and consider it in the overall context of the OCP, of land use planning, and so forth. So it's great. It certainly helps that there's buy-in from, and it's not unanimous. There were certainly at least one, if not two, letters from the street that were opposed so far, but they are. But it's certainly helpful to have that in place and to have that, more than anything, to have them educated and aware of what's going on. So I think it's a very positive process to have gone through. A couple of quick questions you may or may not be able to answer. Would this size, this development, looking at other zoning, like say the city of Victoria, would this be considered a medium or a high density development?
I would say in City of Victoria, what they call a mid-rise development is anything up to 6 stories. So this, and low-rise is up to 3 stories. So this is, beyond low-rise in a different municipality, but it's at the low end of mid-rise, right? Is that?
it's a difficult question to answer, but it seems to be on the cusp between the sort of high density and a medium density building in terms of the zoning that kicks in.
If I can add, there's sort of three tiers. Again, going by City of Victoria, you've got the low rise, mid rise, and high rise.
Okay.
Right. So if we would say we're out of scale of out of 9, 4 out of 9, let's say.
And can you give us an indication of where the FSRs are for other villages, like Cook Street Village and so forth? There's some mention in one of the notes that of where they were at.
I think, Village Walk is probably your closest one, which is about a 2.3, 2.34 FSR on a rectangular, regular, standard level corner site, corner block.
And the zoning there is 1.5, correct?
At
where
the
Village Walk is.
Yeah,
well,
it was zoned
originally.
for that. It was
Yeah.
it was zoned to its own FSR. Okay, and it's worth pointing out that City of Victoria doesn't include decks or balconies in their FSR as well. So that there's a bit of an adjustment there too between what the FSR that you see for this project is based on Oak Bay standard.
No, I appreciate it. It is difficult to do direct comparisons because of that. I understand that also does include mezzanines though, correct? So the open space underneath is included within that FSR.
Yes, mezzanines are incled. Yeah,
and they're not in ours, I don't believe, because the main floor of ours is smaller than the overfloors that have the overhang.
We don't have any mezzanines in this project.
Oh, okay, the overhang pieces. Okay. So I'm just again, I really appreciate this should be done at the committee of the whole, where it's a bit more interactive. We have an FSR of 2.92 being asked here, and a lot coverage 88.7%. Which is, I made the comment that it was the most dense, and I stand by that. I did a little bit of looking into it, and it's anywhere from, in Oak Bay, 150% or more of any other FSR. Even Village Walk is about 125% of that. I guess I do have a little bit of an issue with the rectangle diagram. If this was a rectangle, you wouldn't build this building on it. I think there's obviously more room for setbacks and so forth in that situation. So, I guess I'll just leave that at that one. I guess the other question I have, the FSR that's listed at 2.92, it does include patios, but those are largely solid-sided. FSR, I'm going to use them I was going to use all of mine FSR because that's what you use, and then you started using FAR because that's what we use. So we'll meet somewhere in the middle. Without the courtyard, the FSR would drop to about 2.71. Is that?
No, I think it's less than that. I'm not 100% sure, but it's less than 2.5.
So maybe just make it as a note, so we have some sense of what that would look like.
Yeah.
But I guess I would get to the apparent FSR. So we have a building that's built out, and from the public's perspective, you can't tell if those inner floors are actually built or not. To the observer, it actually would look like a solid building all the way around and all the way through. Do you have a sense of what the sort of apparent FSR would be with?
Well, actually, that's to me where the value of the rectilinear site diagram lies, because the two would have the same apparent FSR, right, in that they both address the street as a kind of a continuous street wall. And the one is 2.9 and the other one is 1.65, right? So I would say that if you place me anywhere, in a city and pointed me at a 4-story building that was a corner lot with a very small setback on the two main frontages and asked me what the FSR was, I would tell you, I think that probably around 2.2. That'd be my guess, because that's typically what we see. So my answer to your question is that I would say the apparent FSR of this building is 2.2-ish, 2.2, 2.3.
Okay. Yeah. I may argue that at that point, but I'll take that for that. I guess it would be helpful to have some comparisons to other sort of village type scenarios like Cook Street Village and other places like that, to give some sense of what their guidelines are, just so we have some context for this. There was some note, but I'm not going to refer to it here in the letter, but I think it's, I think we have to kind of look at that and have that knowledge. Because I think that is important for us to kind of get a sense of what that looks like in other sort of commercial with residential above. I'm gonna, so in general, the overall pieces, I have a fair bit of concern about the FSR on this. I think that the apparent massing of the building is quite large, and without any setbacks on the outside pieces. I think I would just like some better comfort on this, that is not going to be a very big looming wall, for a number of reasons. The other piece here is just the open space portion of this. This is a very small open space portion. What is it? 11.3% of the lot is left open, just at that one end. And again, maybe you could just speak to sort of other, builds and so forth where builds are, because that seems like an extraordinarily small number, especially compared to other buildings in Oak Bay.
Yes, again, it's a factor of the sloping of the site one story from Cadboro Bay down to Bowker, which means that in terms of the way Oak Bay defines how the open space is calculated, none of the courtyard could be counted as open space because it's built on top of, it's above the natural grade, right? Even though it is a garden space and experientially is open space. So that's the reason why that number is as high as, or the open space is as low as it is, or the site coverage is as high as it is because the entire center of the site is not being counted as open space.
Okay, and that's a fair comment that the courtyard is there. Mr. Murdoch?
So Scott is just pointing out that if you just took the building area, it would be 30% open space. So if we just took the building roof area, as being the site coverage, the open space would be 30%, the site coverage would be 70%.
Yep. So then I'll just talk to setbacks. Are you aware of any medium or even high-density buildings in Victoria or the Greater Victoria area that have 0-meter setbacks, that we have some sense of what this would look like?
Through Mr. Mayor, Village Walk is 0 setback, Black and White is 0 setback, and both of those are just because I know them well. Does that answer your question, sir?
Sure. I thought the plans I saw at Village Walk had 1.5-meter setbacks from the property line.
No, that's a 1.5-meter SRW, statutory right away.
Okay.
So it would be, sorry, going off memory here, be 0 setback on Foul Bay, 0 setback on Oak Bay, and I believe 0 setback on Amphion, and then because the 0 lot line rectangle, I believe, is there, and then the L-shaped building, much typical to the diagram, is sort of more typical of a rectangle site, because you can only create double loaded corridors, so that's how you end up with L's versus boxes on sites like that. So this is just a fundamental situation of the L being compressed by a V. So this is almost in a similar, and probably Greg could describe it better, flat iron buildings that become offices because they're on corner sites and you just can't create any kind of open space in a flat iron building.
Yeah, just further to that, it's a question of livability for the units, and the floor plate gets too deep, and you can't get natural light and daylight and air into the units. So there's a natural limiting factor to the depth of a floor plate for a residential building, which is why as you compress that angle, very often you don't see residential buildings on really tight angled sites because you can't fit it.
Thank you. It was brought home to me as I was looking at and just the pictures provided here. You talk to the Waterfront Crescent, and there's the right-of-way, but there's also the setbacks on those buildings, which in fact adds and makes a total of 25 or so meters versus the 20 meters we have of road right-of-way in our place. So the effective road width is quite large on those. And I just, that notion of having a residential house, a townhouse right up against the sidewalk. There's a picture in one of the renders where there's a person looking in the window along Bowker, right? There's a window there. They're looking in the window.
Right.
It's someone's bedroom or someone's living room.
Yeah. So we do have a landscape buffer there, and this section kind of describes it, right? So I think the point we're trying to make is that we have placing the building at the property line because of the in a frontage. So we create a frontage. The frontage addresses the street because that's the right thing to do. the frontage gets pushed to the property line because it's a triangular site, and we're trying to keep the livability of the interior units, to maximize that, right? Then what we've done is we've recreated that setback in the public right of way because we have the space to do that, and we've done that by landscape and then by the sidewalk and then further landscape in the parking lane. So experientially, you don't experience it as a zero setback, right? So that's I think the point we're trying to make is that with comparing the dimensions, the Bowker right of way is I think 66 feet between property lines. The Selkirk right of way is 52, right? But if you take away the property lines, which is somewhat arbitrary to your experience of the street, the distance from our proposed building to the zoned setback, or where a building might be on the other side of the street, is about 90 feet. And at the Selkirk there, where you've got a 6-story building on one side and a 2-story on the other, it is about 82, I think, right? So the property lines are you don't experience property lines, you experience a street. And what we're doing is shaping the street given the physical kind of parameters that we have available to us. So we're making some informed kind of decisions around how to best balance the livability on the site with the triangular nature of the site, with the right-of-way that we have in order to create a good urban condition.
Does that not presuppose that there will never be a similar development or multifamily across the road? You've essentially used all of that give of municipal land to get that buffer.
You certainly could say that. I think and we considered that, this site is zoned secondary village, across the street is not. So that any development across the street is going to be somewhat different. Now, I do think that, especially at the corner of Bowker, and again, this is my opinion, corner of Bowker and Cadboro Bay, you could stand to see, especially in the context of some of the discussion we've just heard around affordability in townhouses and different housing typologies, you could stand to see townhouse development or something with a bit more density than is there now, this little single-family homes, one-story homes. But, this is, you always have, as council, you always have that ability through zoning to control each individual location. So, you're not tied by this to what happens on the other side of the street. You can control that in order to finish the work that we start here, shaping a street.
And sorry, through you, Mayor, I don't want to keep saying that, it's just as time. The planters, the plantings, the little grass patch, which has pictures of kids playing on it and so forth, that's all municipal property, correct?
Yes.
So who maintains the concrete planters and the plants and everything else? Is that municipal responsibility?
Can that's somewhere, I think, between abstract as the applicant and engineering and parks.
I don't believe that discussion's been had yet, but in the two instances that are of similar nature in Victoria, we maintain them. So the strata maintains them on an ongoing basis, but that would be, once again, as Mr. Demant mentioned, it would be up to engineering and parks to make that determination. Those discussions have not happened yet.
That's fair. Okay. The other question I have here, just in terms of the heights and trying to get a sense of scale. I've tried to walk around there. I've tried to get a sense of where these are at. It's a 4-story building, but it's a taller 4-story building than the ones on either side of it. Is there any sort of mechanism that you have to get an easy sense of scale of what would actually be there? I mean, aside from us going out and putting up balloons or things of that nature, which I'm not terribly fond of as a mechanism.
Well, certainly through all the renderings, we try and give you that sense, right? So, if you're standing in this location on Cadboro Bay, that is what you will see if the building is built there like that. Similarly, on standing in this location on Bowker, that is what you'll see. I think the idea of balloons and things like that, it doesn't really actually give you any kind of true sense of how a building occupies a site, because it changes the nature of the site, and you recognize it differently, right? So like the character of a lawn expanse like this, and one of the people who lives on the street said it probably better than I had, which is that they hadn't met a single person from that building in the years that they'd been on the street, and that's, to me, a direct result of that kind of physical separation that style of development had. And it really, as I say, this kind of street section was based on the idea that you wanted to be able to move cars quickly and efficiently. And I think we've learned that that's actually not a great way to build a community. That to collapse that distance is better. To put people in proximity to the sidewalk is better.
And I think there was general agreement around the table there. I think the question is, does it transition well or not to that? And that's kind of the questions that I'm trying to get my head around in terms of how, because it's going from 35 feet back to 0 in a fairly short order, and it's going, well, it's quite a bit higher as well on that than that building.
Yeah. I think, as I say, at Cadboro Bay, we did step the building back to bring it in line with the face of this building. The way the streets bend does actually visually connect the frontages of the building because of the fact that although this one is set further back on Bowker, if you carry that line forward, our building is set at an angle. It means it pulls away, and you end up kind of clipping that frontage line, clips the corner of it, and then follows more closely to the street from that point on. But they're not, I hope you can see it here, there's not like an apparent big step in the, well, you see it there, that's what it is, right? Like, that's what I'm saying. If you follow the perspective line of those floor plates, they lead you down to about here at our site, right? So it's not a 30-foot difference in step, it's more like 10.
Again, it's hard to get a grasp of it, but walking the site there, the building on your building proposed is about 20, 22 feet taller than that building? Somewhere in that neighborhood?
No, I don't think so. This building lines up just above our 4th floor level, and we're 9-foot ceilings or 10 foot at the top floor, so it's maybe a 10-foot difference in apparent height. It's not that high.
I went off of the geodetics, and they're in different places for the different buildings, but that was the number I got, was around 22 feet. So maybe we can get some clarification of that, about what the height differences are between the
it's not going to be 22.
buildings.
It's not going to be 22
And
feet.
about 10 feet different between the Cadboro Bay building.
Sorry, how much at the Cadboro Bay?
About 10 feet taller than the Cadboro Bay building.
Again, it's a little bit less than a story at both ends. What you're probably referring to is at the corner, because this building is higher, or this wing of the building is higher than the Bowker wing, there might be a taller difference in height between this building on Bowker and our building at the corner, but not where they sort of mediate or connect. Not where they face each other.
Well, I don't want to debate it. I think it's just I think to come back with some clarification. I took the actual grade at Bowker and did the measurements from there to the pieces, and it came out that. But I could be wrong. That's why I'm asking the question and not trying to do that. I just want to get some clarification of that. The numbers I got from that was that the Cadboro side was closer 10.5 feet to the building. The existing building is 10.5 feet shorter than the proposed building. Bowker 22.5 feet. Oak Bay Lodge roof is about 3.5, almost 4 feet taller than the height of the roof line of the building on Cadboro Bay Road. So if you're looking back and forth, you get some sense of the height from the height of the Oak Bay Lodge across the road.
Right.
Again, it's hard sitting there trying to get a judgment of this.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would tell you is that this building is not going to, this wing of our building is not going to look like it's 22 feet taller than this one.
Well, it's certainly set back a lot further, so yeah, and again, trying to get a sense of where that scale is. I mean, I get the value of the being up, of having people close. I'm not sure I buy the value of people's windows being on the sidewalk. And if we can't have the sidewalk, then we have to give up that much municipal land to give a buffering zone for it. I think those are all asks of the community that we have to kind of determine whether that's a reasonable ask. So I'll leave that. I think the accuracy of those roof lines would be helpful. Because again, I'm just trying to get a sense of scale of where this is at. It's taller than Village Walk by a few feet, both to the parapet and to the roof. But it's a slanting slope, so it's harder to get a sense of where that actually looks like in real life, right? So, because the average grade, frankly, doesn't matter that much sometimes, right? In these sloping things, it's really more the effect on the road. So I get that. I had a few questions about commercial, but I think I'll leave it. I guess I would, from a model perspective, I understanding from a letter, I'm not sure if it's true, is the commercial, or the commercial is probably more for the, Mr. Miller on this one. Are they being continue to be owned by Abstract and leased out? Is that the model that's going to be undertaken here?
R&M Miller Assets, which is a subsidiary of Abstract Developments. So commercial holding, yes. I just was trying to be technical to your answer.
Nope, let's make it accurate. Might as well make it accurate. It's on the record.
Yeah.
And the reason I asking the question is there is concern that the commercial sites be occupied. So we want to make sure we're doing everything in our power to make sure that those commercial sites are viable. They're going to be more expensive than the rent is currently, just because they're higher quality units. So how are we going to draw people into those? And so the questions were just around, like, are there enough commercial parking stalls there? We have a restaurant, we have 6 residential commercial units, and we have 6 part-time commercial spots. Is that enough? Is there, sufficient loading zones and so forth for that?
Well, I'll try and answer the question as best I can. Abstract group of companies has a vested interest in the commercial activity on this project, and this is now our 4th mixed-use project, Village Walk being our first one. So we've learned a lot, as we have in residential in 25 years. So we've learned a lot more about what makes a successful commercial business for, to be totally frank, the local feel. So everybody wants that local feel, and that's what it makes Oak Bay Ave, Cook Street Village unique. In doing that, we've designed these modules specifically for that. So, for example, if you look at the plan, all but the restaurant cafe use all shares a common washroom, and that's because we've learned over time we lose sellable or leasable square footage, but what it does do is offset the capital cost of the tenants that are quite frankly owner operators month to month, and we're lowering their capital costs by us putting in the common washrooms. So we've learned that they're not restaurant type uses as much, and if they are, they certainly can add a washroom because it's ability to be zoned that way, but it keeps the cost for them down. So we've learned about the magic sort of dimensions because they look at it on a per month basis. How much is it per month? Not how much triple net TI costs. You got to present it that way. As far as parking, we've also learned a lot about that, and we feel very comfortable in the vibrancy of the commercial, because once again, if we're a vested interest in the commercial component of this, it's a double whammy for us. We're going to get phone calls from the residential side, but we're also going to get tenants that don't thrive, and then that also affects the pro forma. So we do feel very comfortable with balancing it all out. Thank you.
Sorry, okay. I had to put my microphone on to say okay. I think the remaining questions I don't really have for the applicant. They're just some general comments and some ideas about going forward, but I definitely appreciate the level of detail given in the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next questioner. Okay. Councillor Zelka.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Questions, thank you.
Are we keeping it to the motion, or is it really directions for staff? I guess I just need clarification.
No, we're not keeping it to the motion. We're keeping it to the response that you've heard from the applicant, and there may be things that arose last time from the people who spoke that you may wish to address our staff on.
Excellent. So then I'll direct through you questions to the applicant. Would you be willing to bring forward a 3D model, for example, to the next meeting that we have? It would be very helpful, not only of this particular development, but also of the nearby buildings.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe what you're referring to is a context model. Is that right?
Something to help to show scale and height and some way of for those of us who think in a three-dimensional sort of way. Just while I appreciate the diagrams, I would also very much appreciate something like I have to go to, for example, diagram number A700 to see the relative heights of things, but that's the 2D thing. So I'd love something like that in a 3D.
Understand. A context model, we've never done one, but we certainly would be willing to entertain the request. It would take probably 4 to 6 weeks to have that, so we certainly could have it possibly in time for, well, we'd have it in time for public hearing, but I don't know if we'd have it in time for the next meeting, Your Worship. And it would be, just to be clear, it'd be light sand color boxes. It wouldn't be fancy, you know, little tiny bricks or anything like that. It would be, because it's too hard to do that into scale, or it'd be a really, really big model. It'd be sort of 2 feet by 3 feet probably, but it would have surrounding context of it would take probably 6 weeks, I would imagine.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Did you not have one for the black and white?
No, we had a building model for the black and white. Sorry, I had
there's a difference.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
that's just a building. It doesn't show any context. It shows some streetscape, but it doesn't show any. So that's more of a marketing model. What I believe Councillor Selk is asking for is a context model, so it shows proportion, site, street widths, trees, and it would probably be capturing the Oak Bay Lodge, probably the peninsula of apartments, and probably some rows of single family in the intersection. Is that what you're referring to, sir?
That would definitely help me.
Yeah, it would probably take about 6 weeks, I imagine.
So that was one question I wanted to ask. Another, with respect to the vibrancy of the commercial aspects, I don't know whether this is common or not, but you probably have a business plan with respect to the commercial sites. Is that something that would normally be shared or could be shared so that we can have a sense of the vibrancy aspect in terms of how you're moving forward on this?
Sure. So
I don't know whether we can ask for that or not.
I'll try and answer that question as best I can. When requested by the neighborhood, talked a lot about cafe, restaurant, some alcohol use, you know, within reason. So creating a bit of a vibrant that would span. They talked about spanning reasonable hours, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. To create a bit of activity. That I heard, I don't have memory here. Kids might play. Places my kids can eat at on the go, and certainly Vanilla does a great job of that. But another venue, and so that seed was planted almost a year ago. When it came up in a meeting, and I can't remember which one, probably a planning land use meeting, it was brought up again, and we spoke with staff, and we had no problem committing to a restrictive covenant to do that, because in the end, if that's part of the buy-in, we can stand behind that. So we've done that. It's a natural to create that 30-foot overhang, I believe, 30-foot setback from the corner. So you remember the building right now is right to the corner. That's been removed. It's a 30-foot setback. So it's opening up a plaza, not only for traffic safety, where you can start to see around the corner and open up that pedestrian walkway, where right now it's a little bit reactive. That is supposed to be a cafe. We see transitioning up the road as probably retail, spa, beauty, pet stores are very, very popular. Transitioning into quasi retail office. So that's where you'd start to get into some financial institutions, real estate planning, financial planning, things like that. And really, where it comes down to is the module's about 850 to 1,000 square feet, and that seems to be a great model for people to make it affordable on a monthly basis. The larger cafe would have to be a more substantial capitalized tenant for that bigger capital investment. For example, we've already allowed a chute to come through the whole building, so it's taking up a den to allow come through the building, so any odors that are created within that cafe are not disposed onto the street like a common practice.
Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing potential ideas as to what the commercial aspect would look like, because of course that impacts again on parking, noise, and potential uses of the building, say after hours, in terms of what that would look like for the neighborhood.
Yeah, I will say that we've now entered into 2 leases on Village Walk after a year and a half of vacancy, because we didn't have the right tenants. So, for example, we had some tenants that weren't connectivity to the street, too much parking demand. We just didn't do it because it's quite, to be quite frankly, just prolonging a problem. So we are committed to that. We do feel as though we're going to get the right kind of people that will be there, and we do feel strongly we'll have the adequate parking to sustain that.
As you no doubt heard at the Committee of the Whole, that safety is a really important consideration for the community in this particular intersection. And I really appreciate this opportunity to move that issue forward, maybe some aspects of the resolution of that issue. And certainly appreciate the input, not unconsiderable input from Abstract. I wanted to ask in particular, being on a downhill slope and seeing it as there's going to be more intensity of traffic, more intensity of pedestrians, more intensity of usage in that area as a result of the development, whether there was any concern or whether there was possibly we might need a study to see whether there's any concern for safety for those who are on that plaza with respect to traffic.
So I'll just use this mouse here. Or not. Okay, here we go. So this once again, this opening is 30 feet. Currently, it's about probably a 14-foot high building. So at street level, you're not seeing past that building. Once this building opens up 30 feet, it's going to visually open up that corner. That, with realignment of all the boulevard frontage, which unfortunately we don't have a slide here, but it's in the previous presentation, it's going to create larger places to gather so that people, and I think one neighbor commented that sometimes you gather too many people in that corner, you have to come almost step out onto the road a little bit, or if somebody's coming too close, it feels a little unsafe. Now that you've opened up that area considerably, it's going to feel way different. And that's a very similar example to the previous Hidden Treasures, which was 0 lot line at the corner of Foul Bay and Oak Bay, right on the corner. And when we moved that building away and we put in the SRW, statutory right-of-way, it's opened up that corner. So albeit the building is at 0 lot line, the pedestrian realm is not. And we're vastly improving the pedestrian realm both on Bowker and on Cadboro Bay. My opinion on the intersection, I think the intersection could do with a major overhaul. I think the slide that we showed, in our opinion, was probably the best example. I think it's proven, and I've seen it time and time again, traffic calming is by people. More people, slower traffic. And it sounds a little counterintuitive, but I've seen it time and time again. More interesting, more commercial activity, slower traffic. And my opinion, I'll give you an example. You can probably name every retail outlet along Oak Bay Ave, but I bet it's hard pressed to name the retail outlets that are in the yellow building opposite Lady Fitness that's pulled back from the street and then stepped back again on the residential because it's not vibrant, there's no activity, and they're nondescript. So having eyes on the street, people on the street, cars on the street, people on the street will slow down the traffic. That, and obviously coming downhill on Cadboro Bay is a challenge. So compressing and slowing down the traffic will most certainly help, and we're totally in favor, albeit we're not the people that have been there for a long time, but we want to aid and facilitate any way we can.
Yes, and thank you. It may be counterintuitive, but what the statistics seem to show with respect to traffic control devices is that when you put a traffic control device in, such as a streetlight, unfortunately the accident rates go up. I don't know whether it's the pedestrians get lulled into a sense of safety, but
it's almost a dare,
yeah.
And that's why compression helps. And a good example of that again is I think it's Bank Street running in behind the school. It slows people down. Scott Street, Ryan Street, compressing.
So the question that I would have is whether yourself or maybe through staff, whether some analysis could be done as to the safety of those people in that public patio, because I see there are only three steps that possibly a car might coming from the north might possibly be able to jump the curb and God forbid something happen in that area. Going south, I don't see a problem because there appears to be a wall protecting it, but it's the southbound cars possibly.
Good question. We're not concerned about it. In fact, if anything, a raised elevation and grade would be further to protect the car. But certainly if there was a huge risk in this development, there'd be an increased risk with the current development being right at the corner. So you'd have less than 30, or you'd have a 30-foot decreased amount of area.
I hear what you're saying, but there will be more intensity, there will be traffic control device, there will be additional opportunities, unfortunately. So that's why I just wanted to raise the question as to whether some analysis could be done with respect to that, in terms of what either we need to do or possibly the strata would need to do to protect pedestrians.
Yes, sir, and just to that point, the strata is one strata, so the commercial activity, even though it's two separate budgets, it's one strata. So what's in the best interest of the commercial is also what's in best interest of the residential, and vice versa.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands for questions. Oh, yes, go ahead, please. Councillor Braithwaite for questions, please.
Thank you so much. A lot of my questions have been asked already, but I'll just reiterate a couple of them, and that they would be around the density. I'd be very interested to see the density of other buildings within Oak Bay in comparison. I know that Councillor Murdoch had some information there, so I guess that would be a direction that I would like to see staff come back to us with, is what the density of this building compared to others in Oak Bay would be. The contextual model, I'm interested in that, in that, is it not an expensive endeavor to do something like that?
Yes.
So then, to me, I would not want to see you go ahead with a contextual model until we had answered all of our questions around, site coverage and height and all of those kind of things. I wouldn't want to see you go into that just to have to do another one if that plan didn't go ahead.
It can be modified because you could remove a section of the building, but I guess it comes back to what we believe respectfully as professionals, and when you shape a site, we didn't come up with an FSR arbitrarily. We worked. In fact, it's almost insignificant. I know it perhaps should be from council's perspective, but when we look at shaping a building and this is a secondary village, which means density, vibrancy, commercial. So what we tried to do was use context, and I mean, it's a sloping site, so it creates a little bit more height at the corner, naturally. But we look at the context of the adjacent apartments, and that's how we shape our site. So I do understand what you're saying, and I do have obviously lots of information on properties in Victoria, but not as much in Oak Bay, unfortunately.
And I guess that going back to the shape of the site, I mean, you knew what the shape of that site was when you purchased the land, obviously.
Most definitely.
And so you knew that there was going to be issues on trying to design something to fit in that spot.
Most definitely.
Okay. So then that is not, let me first say that I really am excited about having something new at this site. I honestly am. I'm not excited about seeing something at the density level that this one is. I would love it if you had come to us and said, here's a beautiful design that we have that has 33 units in it that's set back, 5 feet or whatever it would have been, some sort of a setback. Unfortunately, you haven't come with that, and so I'm really struggling with this because I want to have something wonderful at that corner, that it deserves to have something good at that corner. So in saying that, I do have a couple of other comments. Again, around the height of the building, I too was looking at the numbers and was considering that this building is much higher than the 2 apartment buildings that are beside it, and is just under the height of Oak Bay Lodge that's across the street from it.
I don't believe that's accurate, and unfortunately we don't have the data. All I can say is right here in this corner of the building, it's as low as it can be contextually. So there's 9-foot ceilings and then a slight raised penthouse level for animation. So 3 floors of 9 and then pulled back on the 4th floor. This building, I don't have the exact number. Typically, they're 8-foot ceilings.
Yeah.
Okay. And likewise with this corner of the building, they're all based on residential floor. So we base this on the residential floor to floor, this on the residential floor to floor,
Right.
and then the balance becomes just that, the balance, the residual balance as the grade falls.
Okay.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So I'll just confirm. We did, the height of this building was surveyed for us, and the height of this building was surveyed for us. And this, I can confirm that the roof of this building lines up above our 4th floor level and below our roof level, right? Because this, at this end of Bowker, there's a step down to the patio. So, effectively at the very end of the building, we're 3 stories tall, and shortly thereafter become a 4-story building, right? So what I'm saying is that the parapet of this building would align just above our 4th floor level, and then we have the roof above that. So there's 1 story, about 10 feet difference in height between this building and our building at this end.
Okay.
Now, because this building or this wing of the building is based on Cadboro Bay, which does slope, and which actually as a byproduct gives us this nice almost double high space at the ground floor, which is great for cafe restaurant type use. That means that the relationship between our building at this end and this building is the same. It's about 10 feet different for the very same reasons that we have a higher floor to floor, but we also do step down again to effectively 3 floors right at the very end. So you have a kind of a visual transition
Right.
where that existing building height is sort of halfway between our height at the very end of our building and the continuous height of our building, right?
Right, I understand.
So I think what is maybe confusing people is the height of this wing relative to this building. But they are contextually not adjacent to each other.
So the contextual model will actually help us with that.
Yeah, I'm sure it would, yeah.
Just a comment on the corner of the building, I mean, saying that it's set back by 30 feet, but what is the setback of the floor above?
The overhang, so the ground floor is set back 30 feet. There is an overhang that along Cadboro Bay is 5 feet deep and extends to, I think, 10 feet just at the very kind of point of the corner, right? So I would say it's probably a 20-foot setback at the face of the building to the corner.
So it overhangs the bottom part by 10 feet?
Just in kind of in one corner, section, yeah.
Okay. And then the parking. Let's talk a little bit about parking because that, of course, is the big issue. And maybe I can direct a question to staff, Mr. Thomason. I know that for other businesses within Oak Bay that are unable to supply parking spots for their business, we charge them a certain amount, or have charged them in the past a certain amount per spot that they are unable to give us. So would that something like that apply at a building like this?
I don't think it would. That's primarily, I believe, Oak Bay Village in the bylaw, where there is actually a parking lot within a certain distance of a development or project. Where they actually would pay in lieu of not providing all the parking. I don't believe it would be applicable here.
Because it was something like $20,000 a spot or something, wasn't it, or something like that? That would have been expensive.
Might have been 7 or 8.
Oh, I like 20 better. Okay, and then my next question would be around the covenant for the restaurant. I would love to see a restaurant in that area, more like a pub perhaps would be really nice, right, Michelle? And but what happens if the restaurant does not become viable in that location? I highly doubt that's going to happen, but we have a covenant then on that space to only be a restaurant. So I need to kind of understand what would happen if a restaurant would not be viable in that spot.
Through Mr. Mayor, and I probably question to staff, I would believe that I would have to come back to council, or the property owner in perpetuity would have to come back to council, and they would have to ask to have that covenant modified or lifted. Correct.
If I could just add in response to that question, the best way to ensure the viability of the commercial use is to give a good population density within close proximity to it, right? That's why people use it, because it's convenient.
Yes. However, again, the density, to me, the density is too much in that spot. Okay, I'm almost done. Density. Oh, in the email that you sent to us, Mr. Miller, you talked about amenity contribution, and one of the bullet points was 2 electric bikes and charging. Now, I'm assuming that those 2 electric bikes and charging are only for the people who are living in that building and not for the general population.
Correct, and they didn't form part of our application. They were always intended to. They certainly can, but that was part of our business plan with this particular project.
And then, do you have electric charging in the building or no?
Yes, we do.
Car charging?
Yeah, I believe we have the capabilities of up to 4, but we usually include 1 or 2.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
And if I may, there was one question about context, and I was just thinking about something that may help, and I'll be very brief. People asked about Village Walk. Village Walk's easy to remember because it's a fairly flat rectangle site. It's a 16-foot high ceiling at the clear space on the commercial, and then basically the same typical residential floors above. So 3 residential floors with 1 floor of overheight commercial. So if I may, at the corners of this corner and this corner, it's lower. So the reason why I can say that for certainty is because this ground floor plane is only at 9 foot clear. Village Walk flat is at 16 foot clear. So I know that. So what'll happen is this whole wing in its entirety is lower. This whole wing is lower for sure until probably about the last third of the building. I know that because this starts at residential, 9 foot clear, and it starts at retail office at 12 foot clear, so it's still 4 feet lower until the site dramatically starts to take off down the hill. And it is taller. I believe it's about, what's the peak of the ceiling at the corner? About 15 feet? So unfortunately we don't know that, but it's very close to probably within about a foot. So at this corner right here, it's very close to Village Walk, but this whole wing right here and the majority of this wing is lower. So if that helps, because it's there, it's easy to understand. And contextually, it has the similar setback, only in this particular instance, this corner and this corner, where it addresses Bowker and where it addresses Cadboro Bay, is pulled back considerably more than that of Village Walk, if that also helps.
It does, thank you. So my final question then would be, if we were to say to you, you need to have a 5 foot setback around this building on all sides, how does that then affect what you're trying to do here?
Dramatically. It's what we obviously look at things like that where we look at the double loaded corridor, and the difference is you get you need to work with certain modules of residential to have livable. So you want to have not too deep or it gets too dark, and not too wide or it doesn't load up bathrooms and bedrooms. So this module right here is exactly the module to work with to the minimum, because you can make them a little bit bigger for larger units. And this module right here is exactly half of that module, with the exception of circulation corridor. So if you take this and move it 5 feet, you take this, move it 5 feet, it unfortunately crushes it. And we did at one time try to design a single building to help a little bit with that. But what it did do is it made this wing too tall, because by breaking this into sort of 3 separate buildings, one building over here, and then separation by way of a staircase, another building over here, and then another building over here, and using more rectilinear forms, it allowed us the ability to break up the mass. And it's very hard to explain in a presentation like this, but it was an exercise that we went through, and we have about 6 versions of this particular building, and in every single instance we were fighting the functionality and the livability of the circulation, because when you squeeze that corner together, this sort of moves to sort of here. So it's a very significant impact.
So then going on something one of the councillors said at the committee of the whole meeting, which was to keep a 0 setback on Cadboro Bay Road, but to put a little bit of a setback on Bowker.
And for exactly the same reasons, it's a significant impact to the overall design, and excuse me, and that's with the additional information that we provided tonight. We tried to demonstrate that we feel very comfortable in the performance of the outcome, and that's what we're trying to hang our hat on, the significant design of the project in its entirety.
I guess where I'm going is, if it did come down to the fact that we said you cannot build this building unless you put a 5 foot setback in that spot, I'm pretty sure you could probably come back with a design that would have a 5 foot setback in that spot. And I don't mean to push you, but I do kind of.
I guess that would be taken under advisement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Ney, please. Questions?
Yeah, through your chair, this one's to staff actually. To our planner on page 4 of the January 10 report. There's a small paragraph regarding the FAR. I'm just going to pick up conversations that we've been having here around the FAR. It reads, it's just 2 sentences. The proposed development represents a residential density of 188 units. This exceeds the FAR of any existing development in Oak Bay but with no specific density of height ranges attributed to the OCP land use designations, the proposed development is not inconsistent with OCP policy. And I'm just wondering, I think I understand the sentence, but I'm just wondering if you could explain a bit more how it is that we if we don't have if we haven't got any specific ranges attributed to the OCP, how does one gauge the FAR in this instance then?
If I may, there's been significant conversation around the floor area ratio tonight, but there are different ways of measuring density on sites. So this paragraph really talks about the density in terms of units per hectare, and that would be looking at the number of residential units that are on the site. So comparing that with a land use such as the village area that this is located in, you would typically look at higher densities within those areas than compared to what you would see in a neighborhood, for example. So for something like a village area, I would estimate you would be looking at anywhere from, pardon me, 80 to 100 to 150, 180 units per hectare for something within a secondary village area.
And what we have here is what?
It's approximately 188.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's helpful. And the other point is that I can see that there's ways that this has got more density. I'm finding myself not so troubled by what I'm hearing from other people. One of the issues is that the Oak Bay Lodge, where we were wrestling with that, was going to be 7 or 8 stories up, would be a very different contextual comparison at this juncture. But the development was never done. But we are still looking at this density development in the context of that other property. So. And even with that, it's from my eye, it's settled there. But anyhow, that's another issue. So thank you for that comment to staff from staff. One other thing I'd just like to ask staff is about the traffic. I know we're talking about the building, but I do have a question around the proposal by the applicant about what that remedy could be for the corner at Cadboro Bay and Bowker. I wanted to ask staff engineering whether the 2009 traffic report that we did is still relevant given the likelihood of increased traffic from this development. Would the proposal or the recommendations that came out of the 2009 report still be relevant? I'm wondering.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Ney, the 2009 traffic study is still relevant. There are some upgrades and changes that need to be made, and that's part of the proposal and the documents that have been presented. So for the most part, the way the intersection looks in the study, in terms of the proposal, option 2 remains correct, true, even with an increase of north-south traffic. So that would be the changes to the way the curb looks heading to east to Bowker, the island in between, like the crosswalk that crosses Cadboro Bay. So all those are all they're all the same. The additional thing that we asked the developer to do was a crosswalk warrant study in terms of whether a pedestrian actuated, push a button and a flashing light happens for the crosswalk across Cadboro Bay. They did that and came back with the recommendation that yes, indeed, it's warranted. So that's also part of the recommendation for what needs to change there at that intersection.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a few questions. One relates to this, when we look at SK22-B. And particularly the Bowker Avenue width there. Do I read it right that the total walkable area in front of the proposed project is 11 feet?
It varies because of where the landscape is. I think at its minimum it's 5 feet, and then it widens out to 11. The whole frontage actually varies. You know, when we're talking about the sort of zero setback on Bowker, that's only a portion of the frontage. Closer to the corner, it actually steps in quite dramatically. So it's not zero at the corner.
Because there was a question to you by Councillor Murdoch about where there's 0 feet setback. And you may not know this, but I understand the Bell Block, which houses hide and seek amongst other places,
Right.
is right on the lot line.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know how wide the sidewalk is in front of there?
No, I don't know. It feels like it's less than 8 feet. Yeah, like it feels like it's like a 6 foot sidewalk, but
Okay, and,
you know,
and did you know how wide in front of the Penny the sidewalk is offhand?
I
Just
don't.
I'm trying
I
to
don't.
kind
Yeah.
of get the
Yeah.
picture in my mind. Okay.
The example that came to my mind was Fernwood Village, right? Where you have those older buildings that you have very narrow sidewalks there, and what you have is traffic calming, right? People drive very slowly through there, and they've appropriated the entire Gladstone. It's Gladstone, right? With the lights over the street and so on, and it's basically become a pedestrian zone. It's, my opinion, a beautiful space, not hampered by the fact that the buildings are zero lot.
Okay. And I just wanted to confirm my understanding as when the lot coverage. If we were to accept that back area, which is green and garden, if we were to accept that that's not counted as building, did I understand you to say 70% lot coverage at that point?
Yes.
Does that kind of assumption affect in any way the floor area ratio? I take it nothing back there is considered floor area.
It is, yeah, it is considered floor area ratio, and I don't have the exact number, but it would reduce if you decided that you wanted to think of this without considering that courtyard as floor area ratio, it would also reduce the floor area ratio.
So right now, that triangular garden is considered floor.
Yeah, as are all the roof decks as well.
Oh. So, I mean, that, because there's quite a stark difference between the lot coverage if we treat that garden area as garden area, and it is garden area. So I'm wondering how that would reflect in the floor area ratio. And I wonder if at some point someone can come up with that, because I don't see it as floor. I can understand balconies or floor. I can, that's kind of makes a bit of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of sense that where you have a garden area that it would be, because it's going to be treed and landscaped.
Yes, yes.
So that's one area, sorry, that's one factor I'd like a different calculation on, much like you've done the lot coverage of 70% if you treat that as garden. Those were... Yeah, and obviously the sense of how wide the bell block is compared to how wide you're proposing here. All right, so no other questions? Yes, Councillor Croft.
Well, your question there just made me think of the differences by the way we calculate floor area. And if the City of Victoria doesn't include balconies in their floor area, then I think I would like to see the calculation that you're going to do to exclude the balconies as well, so that we can compare to other municipalities, if that's fair. Thank you.
It's going to make it kind of, we've got apples and oranges, and now we're going to get bananas too. So, if we have our bylaw versus their bylaw, then we change it. But I think more numbers the better. Make fruit salad at some point. All right. Other questions? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Zelka. And then I think we'll wrap up the questions, and we'll have a debate in the next 40 minutes about what we're going to do with this motion and any other motions that may come forward. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much. Question first for the proponent, another question, if I may. Just imagining into the future a little bit, it would be helpful to know, this intersection has been unsafe for quite some time, and I know this has been on and off our priorities for quite some time. And as we've sort of been struggling with, I guess, enough money to some extent to pay for the upgrades that are necessary, what might the impact be on the building should this intersection be left as is and no upgrading work be done? Or maybe only, say, 50,000 be done, even though we do have a report suggesting it will cost much more than that to get it to an upgraded state.
Probably economically none, but I think that's looking at it halfway. I think part of the, for us, I think the overall vibrancy and overall change to the neighborhood, I think it's not quantifiable financially. I think it's something that we came to understand. We've been the property owner there for a number of years now, and we would like to see it move forward because we do see it as a huge value add. Obviously selfishly for us, but I think it's appropriate as a community builder to look at that as well as part of our approach.
Well, anyway, I appreciate the answer. I just wanted to ask because what if? So I just wanted to say that potentially could occur in the future. So I just wanted to simply have a sense of what it might look like. I have another question, but this would be more for staff. With respect to lessons learned, say, from the Clive, I don't know whether building and planning or our manager of planner might be able to share either now or in a report. With respect to the Clive, certain assumptions were made with respect to occupancy, absorption, demographics, parking utilizations, that some of those lessons learned may be transferable to this particular building. I'd be very interested in hearing, either now or at a future time, a future report, what lessons learned, and how has the neighborhood in that area absorbed the parking or lack of parking. I must say, on my Fridays, midday, when I'm in that part of Oak Bay Avenue, I can't find a parking spot anywhere, but that's just me. So I'd be interested in hearing what the planner might have to say with respect to lessons learned. Thank you.
Yeah, staff able to answer that on the spot, because it does seem like it's a pretty big question, because this really is not something we'd asked before, and it would take some kind of thought and research perhaps.
Your Worship,
Yes.
I think you should just leave that with staff to kind of ponder, because I think there's a lot of things that we would have to consider, who's judging the lessons that needed to be learned. So,
Thank
but
you.
we can look at trying to provide something.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much to the applicant and the crew. And now it comes back to us. First of all, we do have that live motion on the floor. Let me just wake up my iPad here, and just to reiterate what that is. And we'll repeat that in just a second. There we go. And the motion, and as I read it from Ms. Jones's report, that the application be referred back to staff to continue negotiations on the proposed development. So that's moved and seconded, is now before us, and I invite speakers. Councillor Kirby, Councillor Zelko. And there's no, I mean, we have heard your view before.
Yeah.
So you could just say you concur with yourself.
I didn't take time asking questions because I've been participating I participated in 2 of the meetings that were held earlier by the developer with the community, as I live nearby, and was invited by the neighbors to join in those meetings, where I assure you there was thorough engagement by the community, and Councillor Murdoch commented that the neighbors aren't experts at zoning, but nor do I think that we are experts at zoning, and I think we develop a general sense of it, but I think that when you've participated for over a year in the process, you have a real stake in the game because your property is adjoining. You are engaged, and these are the letters we've received show just how engaged the neighborhood has been in the process, and how supportive the majority are of the application, which I think speaks volumes. we don't have a crowd here like we've had with previous applications of this nature. We don't have objections because we have, there are concerns, there's worry, there's probably some anxiety about change in general, but there is not an overflow crowd of angry residents saying that this is inappropriate development for the site. Everyone in the neighborhood sees it as a safety issue. The dilapidation of the buildings in the back, the lighting, the pole smack right in the middle at the edge of the road, so as you're about to cross, you have to really stand out or wave in order to get out into the intersection safely. These are all concerns we've heard from the neighbors that would be addressed by this building, not by improvements to the intersection by us, but by the building being set back further. So this improves walkability. It's improving the options for people to live close to where they work or play and eat and meet each other. It builds connectivity within the neighborhood, which everyone is seeking. And I assure you, at all those meetings, we all talked about a cafe of some sort where we could meet and see each other more frequently. And also to get to know the people in the building next door that we don't see, except for if they're at the other commercial zone, which is our corner store on my street. So do we really need to have wider setbacks, to have a dead space and lawn? I think we're beyond that. That's a bygone era. It's time to embrace some new design concepts. I have two posties that live on my street, postal workers, and who are letter carriers and deliver mail every day. And both of them commented on this design saying, "Oh, I can't wait. I hope it happens because it'll make the street more interesting." And the only reason that anybody likes the building that's there currently is because it's right up to the sidewalk and it makes it more interesting. And you feel more a part of something. And don't we need density to support local businesses? We need a small increase in density. This is not a dramatic downtown high-rise. This is a small building that fits within the two buildings beside it. It's smaller than Oak Bay Lodge. The shadowing comes from Oak Bay Lodge and outshadows this building for the neighbors. And by the way, the renderings were very helpful to compare, what the site, that last one especially, was very helpful for me. So I appreciate that. To also see that there is really truly green space right in front of the building. Like, I thought that the building came straight up to the sidewalk, but knowing that there's a bit of plantings in between, that does give you a sense of space. And privacy for the residents. And don't we need incremental additions to our tax base? I mean, we struggle every year with our budget estimates to keep the tax increases low and to keep this community sustainable as an almost entirely residential tax base. I think a tiny incremental increase in that residential tax base is necessary, and I think our OCP supports it. And I don't think this application would be coming forward if the residents of the neighborhood didn't support it, and if it didn't fit contextually and wasn't supported by our OCP. I've just rescanned through our manager of building or of planning's report, and nowhere in there does she raise any great red flags for us. The reason it's here is because it's been reviewed and carefully assessed by the planning staff to see if it fits our OCP. And it does over and over and over again. Because it encourages the walkability, cyclability, it's an environmentally sensitive building, it's looking after Bowker Creek and rain gardens, and it's built green. I think the fear of allowing something to go too quickly through this process is undue in this circumstance. I think we have, all of our questions have been carefully answered. I think the community the neighborhood adjacent supports it, and I don't see how what our delay or redesign of a building at this level with our expertise will do to achieve a better built, community. This is a great project from what I can see. Yeah, I think that's it. I just wanted to say that I'm also really pleased with my neighbors for participating in the process, because I saw more of them here than I've ever seen before. And that's new and exciting for North Oak Bay to be participating in the process. And then there's a next generation that was here and engaged in this process. And we received lots of letters from them, and that was very unusual to get letters from young parents that are concerned about their development. And that was, or not concerned, but we're actually supportive at this point. So I wanted to say thanks for that.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka next.
Thank you, Chair. Question about process. If we do approve the motion as stated, I presume, and I want to confirm, would it come back to Committee of the Whole with as the next step? But what would the next step be, please?
Typically, if we've delineated a whole series of questions that we want staff to, if there's anything in addition to the motion, then it would come back. If it's just a report to council on the specifics of the motion, it doesn't necessarily have to go back to Committee of the Whole. I guess it depends on what the answers are. Ms. Jones is looking like she has an idea about how to deal with this. I'll just wake up my iPad, because here it says refer back to staff to continue negotiations on the proposed development. And if it's just a report out, it can be done to council. Ms. Jones.
Your Worship, a typical process with respect to land use would have a resolution or recommendation from Committee of the Whole bringing it forward for first and second. Yep. We aren't at that. The council hasn't undertaken that at this time yet.
Good. Thank you. Oh, that's the only thing. All right. Any other speakers to the motion to refer this? Okay, Councillor Murdoch, please.
Well, I think the goal here is to provide some guidance in terms of what we'd like to see back on this. So a couple of pieces. I was going back through notes from the FAR committee process, and there's a great little piece from Newcastle Planning about the reason for setbacks. And they list them as to ensure adequate visual privacy to dwellings from the street, to ensure new development provides for landscaping to the street, and to ensure new development makes a positive contribution to the local context. I think those are still valid. I don't think they're antiquated notions. I think the general principle of the taller the building, the farther the setback model, while not written in stone, it still has validity. I do think that I would like to see some effort made, particularly on Bowker, to see that moved off the street a little bit and have some of that green space and privacy and pieces, landscaping owned by the building. I appreciate it's incredibly difficult. However, there is the option, of course, of always any V-shaped building and moving it directionally back, which automatically moves the setbacks in for everything. You just cut off the wingtips of that building. I'd like to maybe get some sense of from the proponents at the next meeting about, what that would kind of look like in terms of its impact on the number of residences and so forth. We certainly like to see the number of residences kept, reasonably high in this, just as all the reasons that Councillor Kirby mentioned. I think I would like to see a 3D model. I perhaps the proponent could work and look at this. Maybe we could do it through a 3D model if you have these renderings in electronic format. If we can just have a computer available that we can look through it and do a walkthrough at that scale, that might be a more appropriate model that we could share with the public through that piece. I want to point out that yes, correct, my numbers were wrong, and it was 11 feet, not 22 feet from the building adjacent. So thank you. I just went back and did that. I mismathed. I would say that it was interesting to me at that Committee of the Whole because the neighbors in all this conversation were focused on that intersection. That was the primary issue that they were raising over and over again. I was feeling a little frustrated because I'm trying to get to the land use discussion, and we're talking about the intersection. But I think it reflects the community need for that, and certainly we're going to have to spend, if we're going to do that properly, it's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. I think the original estimate was 150, and that was some years ago. So it's going to be a fair bit of money. So certainly anything that the proponent can do to bring funding to that was well appreciated, because these changes, if they go through, would have an impact on that. And I think that the vibrancy right up to the sidewalk is true, but only up to a certain point. I mean, at some point, the vertical mass becomes a thing. And that's kind of the hard part we're having, I think, to discussion with here. And so the more information provided to give that information back would be helpful. I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we're looking for 35-foot setbacks. I'm not trying to mimic what's adjacent to this. But I think a 3 to 6 meter setback, somewhere in that range, similar to what's on the design for Waterfront Crescent and other step-back buildings, it seems to me very appropriate. Maybe again angled away, so it's adjacent at the beginning and slowly angles away towards the adjacent building. I would still like to see probably a little softening of the Cadboro Bay Road piece of that, just to kind of soften the look. Keep the 4 stories, but maybe have a 2.5 at the end point where it comes in, if that would be effective. I'd like to see there be a little bit more contribution to public green space on this. Again, the setbacks accomplish that. I'm not entirely convinced that covering the entire lot and then digging holes in the streets and planting trees is really a community amenity. It helps, and it's going to look good, but it's also essentially just transferring those trees to our space that would normally be on a boulevard. I think the FSR probably does have to come down a little bit. My personal feel on this one is that it is relevant in this, particularly if you add the effective massing of the inside courtyard, which we can't see as open space but is seen. I think it will look very, very large on that street. And I think that we have to sort of consider this again, and I think this is good for us to go back and have this at a committee of the whole, have a chance to kind of look at other, I think the information provided by the proponent about Village Walk was very helpful to me, because it gives me a much better sense of where this sits. And from a staff perspective, I would really like to see some staff provided comparisons to other buildings in Oak Bay, some setback comparisons with other mixed commercial. The examples were given here, but it'd be good to have that in a report from staff. And I'd just like to also see, there was some mention here about densification and justification for that. Saying it's not inconsistent with an OCP doesn't give me a world of confidence. I would probably like to see that perhaps talk about specifically in terms of the FSR and what that would look like and what's appropriate for a small village in our piece. And I would like to see that from a density. Again, there's something new that was raised here tonight in terms of units per hectare. A listing was given of being 100, maybe 180, and then when asked, it was 188 for this. So we're already over the highest number given as a reasonable number. That's not fair to the director or manager of planning, because it's off the top of her head. But I would love to get that information back to us, just so we have a sense. So those are the pieces I would like to have come back when we come back to this at the next go-round.
I'm just going to interject a little bit here. I don't have anyone else on the speakers list in any event, but I think we're struggling here because, to some extent, if there were a consensus on what areas we want staff to, as we call it here, continue the negotiations on or continue discussions about, if there may be a better way to put it, then I could see it going back. But having this as a motion, just talk some more with the developer, I don't think is going to move this project forward. There has to be a consensus on council. You had a long list there of things you'd like to see, but I think before we start giving and asking staff to look into these, I think there has to be support of the majority of council to move forward in that way. That's typically what we've done. They're not quite informational items. For the informational items, that might be something a little different. But so the issue of continuing the negotiations, unless we tell them what we want those negotiations to be around, I think it really is a meaningless motion. And there's one way to do it, Ms. Jones, is just we could look to see if there's specific motions we want staff to address with the applicant. And if we can build consensus around specifics, then that's fine. Now, typically, we don't have two motions on the floor at the same time. So if we're going to try to reach a consensus on this long list of things that you have, Councillor Murdoch, we should probably just, if that's the direction we want to go, then we should just table the main motion we're on now, and then see if we can start building a consensus on what specifics of it. Because it may be that there's no consensus on any of these, and we just proceed with this application to the next step. Well, that's the kind of one end to the other. Yes, Councillor Murdoch.
Well, I think I'm trying to find a balance here between making it reasonable for the applicant to move this forward, at the same time have enough information to make a reasonable decision. I don't want to delay this unnecessarily. I don't want to ask the proponent to go through a bunch of detailed pieces that then aren't going to be supported based on macro level pieces. So I can tell you right now where I'm at, which is that I don't feel comfortable with the massing as it's laid out here. I don't feel comfortable with the setbacks as they are. I don't feel, in comparison to other buildings, I think it's overbuilt for the site, either too high or too close. Probably one of those has to give a little bit, to my mind. So what I'm asking for information is just to get a better clarification of whether or not there is some justification there, and perhaps if we can have a 3D modeling to put us in there to have a look at it, standing in front of it, we can have that. At this point, I'd be not supportive of moving it forward as it is, but there is a possibility that I would if there is appropriate information that answers my question. So I'm a little bit afraid of going cart before the horse here. I don't know if I feel comfortable demanding that they change the design of the building and setting it back and so forth. I think the next logical iterative step would be to kind of go away, take some of that information, and then we can have that discussion at committee of the whole and make some recommendations there to council.
Okay, so what I'm sensing though then is that the difficulty is with the wording of the motion. We want them to negotiate about things that we haven't really discussed or reached consensus on, right? So until we're there, what I'm hearing, what you just said is you want information about all of these issues. You don't want them to go out and negotiate because they don't know the direction that council's taking. So if that's the case, it may be easier to deal with the items, a list of items that we want specific answers to. And your one I heard, for instance, was how does this massing compare to others? That's an informational thing. Some of the others, though, I heard you saying there should be more setback. Is that possible? Is that what your question would be?
Well, I think in fairness, we'd have to make a decision about what's acceptable to us. If the massing we feel is too large, then we would look at changes to the design. So I guess really the question comes first.
For us to decide whether or not this massing is too high, we want staff to go back and work with the applicant to reduce the massing, right? So that would be something specific, and I think that's would be a lot more helpful if there's a consensus than the current motion. So I don't know if people want to comment on that. Councillor Ney.
Well, I hear, Chair, the struggle to get consensus, because I'm so diametrically opposed with what Councillor Murdoch is saying, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the council. So, the way I see this is a very different process that this applicant has taken from any application we've had before the council. Not only has the applicant engaged extensively with the community, but they've undergone negotiations with our staff, with the planner, with parks, with engineering to morph this project. So there's been lots of...
I'm just going to ask you, that's not taking us down the path of arriving at a decision.
Okay.
This is expressing your particular views. So what I'm going to
what-
suggest
okay.
is one way to go about, and sorry for interrupting, but we do have to kind of come to some agreement here about where we're heading. Maybe the best way is for us to defeat the current motion, because it talks about negotiating without giving them any instructions, and then we start with a series of motions. We ask staff, as an example, to work with the applicant to reduce the massing. Yay, nay, okay? We ask staff to work with the applicant to increase the setbacks 3, 5, 6 feet, whatever. And then you have a yay or a nay. So that way we'll give the staff at least some indication and the applicant on what they're facing. And at the end of the day, then, we'll have a sense of whether or not we can proceed to the next step, or we need all this information feedback from our staff. That's what I'm proposing, to kind of break this log jam a little bit. And I appreciate there are differences of opinion, but until we get to the actual meat of the discussion, that's where we want to inject those opinions, not at this point. Councillor Murdoch.
I'm not prepared to make motions. I think I would like to have a chance to think through this a little bit. We could spend 2 hours here for sort of muddling and maybe not get the right questions. I'd prefer that we table this until and prepare those questions and either bring them back or just submit them in written form or some other process than trying to at 10:15 at night with other material to get to try and come up with all the exact questions we want to direct staff to and then debate each one of those questions. I don't think that's doable. I'd much rather just table this, have it come back and have that, do some prep outside of this time and then come back to that.
It's not really a matter of specific questions. I think it's specific issues. Do we want to see a smaller mass? Do we want to see more setbacks? I mean, there's only a handful of issues. Do we want to see a lower building? There's really only a small handful of concrete things that we can ask the applicant to do.
I agree, but we do have questions of staff, I think, that would help clarify those questions, if we see them or not, for me.
Right. Okay.
So my preference to this one is that we table this to the next council meeting.
Okay. Do I hear a motion? Is that a motion to table?
I'm going to move that we table this to the next council meeting and prepare our questions at that time.
Second.
Okay, there's no discussion on a tabling motion. I'm going to call the question. So it's would be 2 weeks hence, right? No, sorry, 4.
Valentine's Day gift.
Oh,
Worship.
there you go. Wow, isn't that something? Okay, so all in favor of tabling? Opposed? Councillor Croft, Councillor Kirby, Councillor Nay, and myself are opposed. Okay, now I'm going to continue the debate on this motion, and we'll see, and then I'll put the question on this motion. Thank you. Any other speakers on this motion? Go ahead.
I'd like you just to call the question on this motion.
Okay, call the question. Are we ready for the question? Councillor Zelka, did you want to?
Still speak, please?
Yes, I'm going
Thank
to
you.
allow you to be the last speaker, and then I'm going to call the question.
Thank you. I'm not ready to make a decision in terms of coming up with actual. I was under the impression that the last hour or two that we've been talking, I was hoping that the proponent and staff have been taking notes in terms of collecting the various questions and the bits of information that we would need. I thought that's what we were doing, providing the information in terms of future information that would come to the next meeting. So I was a bit surprised to hear you say that now we need to come up with the questions. So I didn't quite understand you. Because in the previous presentations that I provided, I thought I actually laid out some of the questions that I would like to see answered, including the 3D model, ideally some aspects about the business plan, some questions about the viability of the business, those sort of things. So I've tried to put some information out there in terms of what I would like to see back to help me make a decision from a policy perspective. So I'm confused, Chair, with where you're taking us. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, the confusion maybe is that the wording of the current motion that's before us is to direct staff to continue negotiations. That's not what you're getting at. You want information, and that can be the source of a subsequent motion. Go ahead.
If I may, I imagine with the information needs that I provided, and ideally all of my colleagues, that staff would go and do some good work with the proponent, and then come back to committee of the whole and provide that information at that time. But sometimes this sausage really shouldn't be made here at the council table. I'm fine for staff to go and make that sausage not in public view. Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done here, and as you know, we don't have, for example, bonus density bonusing. We don't have a lot of things that other larger municipalities have. So one of my concerns here is that we've got an intersection that is going to get more use and possibly might have some accidents, and I'm worried that we won't have enough money to pay for fixing it up. So I just have some concerns here that maybe some discussions need to happen offline. Thank you.
Okay, let me just respond to that a little bit. You have a list of A, B, C. Over here we have X, Y, Z. How does staff know where to take these negotiations unless we give them specific instructions? This doesn't give this current motion only says go and negotiate. And that's why we need that, as Prime Minister Joe Clark used to say, the specificity of it all. We need to give staff some appropriate and focused direction. And for the idea of negotiating a model, is that something that Council wishes? Council wishes, not just you, but a majority. So there's nothing that, if this motion is defeated, there's nothing prevents you from saying, putting a motion, you request staff to work with applicant to bring back a model and describe it. So that's the kind of specifics I think that would help the applicant and would help our staff. Short of that, we're just asking them to have a conversation. And we leave to them to try to figure out what we want, not what Councillor Zelka or Councillor Murdoch or Councillor Croft want, but what is Council. They take instructions for us as a body, not as individuals. All right, so I'm now going to call the question, and the question is that the application be referred back to staff to continue negotiating on the proposed development, period. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Myself, Councillor Kirby, and Councillor Croft were opposed. Now, we still need to specify what we want them to negotiate, what we want them to bring back to us.
If I may, I was kind of under the same impression as Councillor Zelka, in that I thought that some of the comments that I was talking about and asking as in our discussion were being recorded by staff to come back to us with some sort of a report after they had spoken with the applicant. So I'm a little bit confused on this as well, and not really knowing whether or not I want to sit here and go, I want a setback of 3 feet. I don't know if we're at that minutia yet.
Okay. Let's find out if staff have enough directions from Council in order to bring back a report as to where this goes next. Okay. Because I'm sure they were, and they can go back to the video to see who said what and asked for what. Let's get this resolved first. Would it help if we take a little break for you to have a huddle? No?
Your Worship, I think that staff will attempt to try to take from what we've heard here and start that process. I don't think that we're going to be in a position yet that we'll have all the answers, or that you will still have the debate even when you get that information. But if that's of assistance at this late hour just to try to move the process forward, we'll attempt to do that. I think you will find that there's some things that we will just bringing forward as information. You'll still have to debate it, and it'll still be up to
Okay.
council. So we'll do our best, and we may not get everything that everybody has.
So how will you,
requested.
how will you interpret continuing negotiations? What will you negotiate
I think
with
that
the
part of it
applicant?
is, we're very fortunate that the applicant was here this evening. I think he heard many of the same things. And so I think it's going to be a discussion back and forth in terms of, what are these things that could be altered or changed? Because maybe there are some that he'll reach consensus with staff on. Maybe there's others that are pretty firm. Then we'll have to report back to council.
Okay.
I'm not sure how else to do it.
Now, and should that be to the committee of the whole as the next step?
I'm thinking it's probably better. I don't know what the
Okay.
date is, the 20th. Yeah, probably the venue of committee of the whole is probably more appropriate. So my understanding
And
is
then-
that's
and that-
February the 20th.
February the 20th for the committee of the whole, all right? So, yes, go ahead, question.
Mr. Mayor, I'm still left confused because I don't understand how staff can take from our discussions. For example, if they start to discuss setbacks when there's not consensus at the table, or density and there's not consensus here, and they're going to the trouble of having these negotiations with the applicant, but maybe there's only one or two or whatever, not a majority at the council table who agrees with that. So then I don't know how that's productive. It's your time, it's their time, and you're doing something, then you come back. I mean.
Well, there was a majority of council that agreed to this. Agreed to this motion. Go ahead.
So as I said, I don't think we're going to be able to answer all of those questions, but I think it's the small bits. I think that there's without speaking sort of out of turn here, but I mean, there was an awful lot of discussion about the intersection and some discussion with the applicant. So maybe we can define some of that. I'm not suggesting that I'm going to come back with the answers of everything, and it may not be. There may be still several things that are outstanding. That'll then be up to council to have that further debate.
Okay. Now, we have two more, we have a number of more items, but we have two that we have to get to. So I'm going to ask for a motion to extend till 11, please.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Now, they've also had a request for a 5-minute bio break. Yep. Pardon? 2 minutes? All right, make it 3 because that'll take us to 10:30. Okay, so we stand adjourned for till 10:30. Thank you.
Good, and you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Yeah?
Yeah, and life is good.
Yeah. And you? Family as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, your daughter? And
Yeah,
what's
she's
she up
in-
to? Is she living at home still? Or?
No, she's working. She lives in Vancouver now.
Oh,
she's
wow.
working.
Yeah.
She's teaching at a private academy there.
Oh,
and
good for her.
living in the tawny neighborhood of South Granville.
Now where is that? I used to live in what I call South Granville, but I think they changed the name. South Granville for us was, no,
You're
I live
thinking
at
maybe.
15th and Granville.
Yeah.
But my parents, they call that South
So
Granville?
South Granville is basically anything from, I would say, where the business section of Granville, as you come
Yeah.
down Granville, down the hill,
Yeah.
then you've got.
Yeah, okay, that's South
That's
Granville.
South Granville. She's at 12th and Pine, which is
Okay,
2.
yeah, I know. I lived there for quite a number of years, but, because I hear other people calling South Granville down 70th and Granville.
That's Marpole.
Yeah, I know, but some people mistakenly call it.
That's Marpole.
Yes.
Anyone see where Tara went? There she is, okay. Okay, we're going to get going. Councillor Kirby, please. Are we live streaming? Yep, we're okay. We're okay to get going. That was item 12. Item 13 is a second grant opportunity, local government infrastructure. I have a report there with respect to their grant program that's been as I understand it, the deadline's been extended, and that gives us an opportunity to perhaps put in another application, and the Director of Engineering, Mr. Horan, is asking to be authorized to submit an application to the infrastructure planning grant to participate in a joint application to fund a
Move the
Bowker Creek
recommendation.
daylighting
Seconded.
feasibility study. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Just
Go ahead, Councillor Murdoch, please.
I have no issue with the application. I don't think, I think we have a choice between this or the asset management funding. I would actually prefer to prioritize the asset management funding, just, and perhaps Director Horan could explain why he wanted it this way, but to my mind, we have one that we have to do and is a necessary part to us. The daylighting study, well, it benefits the region. Frankly, it's going to really be there for Victoria and Saanich, and it's not urgent. We're not going to get to daylighting Bowker Creek and Oak Bay in the next year or two. We definitely are doing an asset management plan, so I would like to really seek funding for that first over the Bowker Creek, but I would support the applying for the application.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Horan? Go ahead, please.
Through you, Chair, there is some explanation in the report, but I'll just reiterate. I thought about those two things; they're very important. But the key reason for the recommendation of supporting as priority one the Bowker Creek daylighting versus the asset management is currently the initiative for the Bowker Creek daylighting won't go forward if it's not supported, if the grant's not awarded. Whereas if we don't receive a grant application for a grant award for asset management, we still will make progress. It's in part of our operating plans for the year. We'll make progress, so we're not dependent on that grant award. It just helps us out. The other aspect is there's based on the priorities, there are rolling application windows. So if this one, if we don't get two, or if we only get one of the two in the fall, we'll be able to reuse the same application without seeking further approvals. So that's an advantage as well.
Thank you. Any further comments? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. The next one, oh, sorry, were you? Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Murdoch opposed. I thought you were just waving. Okay, Municipal Reserve Fund report. I want to thank Ms. Carter for pulling this report together. It's obviously a very complicated area with all these reserves, and the tracking maybe mechanism wasn't fully in place by the sounds of it. And now that we've got a very good overview of how much money we have on reserve, we have this report. And as I said, we're grateful for that, Ms. Carter. And Ms. Carter, having reviewed this, is recommending that we receive the report, and then we ask staff to begin drafting a reserve fund policy, and give us a little more kind of a bit of a framework as to money's going in, and I suppose in some instances the money's coming out, but mostly and how big the reserve should be. There's lots of issues that need to be addressed. So, Ms. Carter, do you just want to give us a little brief overview? And because I know you put a lot of work, you and your group put a lot of work into this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the legislation, the community charter in particular, guides both the establishment of reserve funds and the use of the reserve funds. And as you know, we have two types of reserves, statutory and non-statutory. Statutory reserves we are established by bylaw, so we do have criteria around those. The non-statutory reserves are not necessarily created by bylaw, and so a policy would provide some guidance for staff in terms of council's wishes for levels of reserve funds, what type of funds would go in, how surpluses, for example, at year end may be allocated and things like that. So it just provides that direction for staff.
Okay. Councillor Croft, please.
A question for the Director of
Yeah, go
Finance.
ahead, please. Go ahead,
And I noticed under the Village Parking Reserve Fund, you've made the comment that provincial legislation now allows these funds to be transferred to the alternate Transportation Infrastructure Reserve Fund. Will your draft report make that recommendation, or is it being done, or do you need direction from Council?
Through Your Worship, my understanding is that back in, I believe it was 2008, that reserve fund was established, and there were funds taken from the parking reserve and transferred in. And we do have bylaws for both of those reserve funds.
Thank you.
Okay. I have some specific questions about some of these reserves. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to... Oh. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead anyways while I'm on a roll, such as it is. I noticed some of these reserves aren't like Heritage Reserve Fund as an example, and you explain its genesis, and it says only for the purpose of capital projects. Bylaw establishing the fund further provides that with the exception of interest, no monies may be appropriated from the fund, save those required for the purpose of land development projects and other capital investments designed to augment the net present value of the principal. And that's kind of ambiguous, because my question is a little bit more specific. If we were to undertake work, for instance, on the two properties we own at Hampshire and Monterey, could that come out of that reserve, or does that need more specifics to permit that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Legislation does allow, in some cases, the transfer of capital reserves from one reserve into another reserve. We would have to go back and reference the specific legislation and the bylaws for that, but there is a potential opportunity.
Okay. Then I go down a little further. I made these little marks. And it has to do with, we have a major crime investigation. That particular balance was gathered for what I can perhaps call old and cold cases that happened prior to our work with the Saanich police. Now that the Saanich police is not going to be kind of involved in doing any major crime for us, we have other liability. We have potential liabilities for any new major crime, such as a homicide. Is there any of these reserves, other than that one, that we could take the money out of? Because none came to mind as I walked through it.
That's correct, Your Worship. The reserves that we do have in place are typically for very specific items. This is the only one that relates to major crimes and potential costs and risks to the municipality for things such as homicide. Because
one of the things that came up during the police budget was the proposal to add substantially, and I think it's referred to here, 80,000 in order to offset these new costs. So, because one of the questions that the police board had was, is there another reserve we could look to, some undesignated funding? And you're at this point telling us no, because otherwise it would have to come out of current revenues.
That's correct.
Okay. And then there's another here, Climate Action Fund, just a little bit below. Just remind me where that money comes from.
Your Worship, those are funds that we receive from the province, I believe, and we provide a report on an annual basis in terms of our climate action initiatives and things like that. And we had, there were two options. I'd have to go back to the actual report, but there were two options. One of them being that we could set funding aside, and so that's what the municipality chose to do at that particular time for those types of projects.
All right. Thank you. Those are my questions. Now, Councillor Zelka, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Well, just it's great to know that these reserve funds existed and what they're allocated for. I had a question earlier on about the parking reserve fund, or a question came up about it as to why, for example, the Bowker Creek property didn't apply, and I just actually answered my own question. I went to the parking facilities bylaw, and it's a different zone, so I understand now why the parking reserve fund would not be enhanced by the Bowker Creek Cadboro Bay facility. But I did want to ask, for example, with respect to the Parkland Acquisition Reserve Fund, I noticed the property across the street may eventually become use. I appreciate knowing these numbers, but I want to start using these funds for buying parkland and doing something with it. I'm kind of curious, when will we start talking about spending this money?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's a question could be indirectly from for us, but also the Parks and Recreation Commission, Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission is something that they might well propose. You were going to reach for the red button, Ms. Koenig. Go ahead.
Likely the place to do that is during the estimates portion. I think that there's a number of things that you'll hear through the commission. I think as the mayor alluded to, a number of issues that are probably going to come before council, and you may have opportunities at that point to dip into that fund.
Okay. Did I see any other hands? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Kirby, please.
I just wanted to mention that I've noticed that there are several lines that address actual transportation and specifically the alternate use of the parking reserve fund, the alternate transportation infrastructure reserve fund, the bike lane, which is just a carryover from when we don't use it and haven't used it over the last several years, fund, and the climate action fund. And there's quite a substantial sum of money once you add all of those up. And so I would actually echo Councillor Zelka's comment that it might be time to start spending that money, and should the projects that we've identified, or the project period that we identified in our strategic priority session, require funding, I think we have adequate funding, and we could do not only just bike lanes, but we could do a AAA active transportation project. So I really want to thank Ms. Carter for this excellent report, and appreciate how clearly she's identified each of these funds, where they come from, what they're being used for. I've never seen a report so that spelled it out so well in all of my years on council. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch, please.
All right. I won't hide the fact I'm a little nervous about jumping at the chance to spend our money that we have set aside, but I just thought I would clarify the climate action piece. This is actually the one that we set up through a recommendation of the Environmental Advisory Committee, Patricia, myself, and from the gentleman who does all this stuff from Parks and Rec, and the environmental person from Saanich all sat down and worked out this system basically where we pay our carbon offsets to ourselves. And there's very specific criteria of how we can use them. They can't be for projects that we would do anyway. They have to be for something sort of essentially the cost differential. If we were to say buy regular lights and we wanted to put an LED in, the cost differential was $5. We could spend the $5 difference essentially out of that. And yes, it would be nice to see that. But those kind of projects, what we're looking at now, we've done the low-hanging fruit. They tend to be big projects. We probably need a few 100,000 more to start really impacting. But I was surprised at how big it was. So that's fantastic that it's growing that much. You sort of think at the beginning you're putting away 20,000 a year or something, and it's never going to add up to anything. To see it there, that is really quite wonderful. So thanks for the report. It was very well done.
Okay, another question then, please.
Just to follow up to that, at a residential level, as a natural gas purchaser, one can switch to renewable natural gas, renewable sources. It's a slightly higher rate, but you are investing in small operations that are returning and creating renewable natural gas, say from farming activities or agricultural activities. So maybe that's something that we can consider, or that staff would consider applying as part of the policy that they would be developing, that money be set aside for those kinds of changes.
Thank you. So, no other hands,
I
questions?
move that the report be received for information, the staff be directed to prepare a draft reserve fund policy for consideration.
Seconded.
Discussion, all in favor, opposed, none opposed, thank you. The next item, number 15, has to do with the request for early approval. Again, a report from Ms. Carter. And you have a list under the recommendations as to which ones are being suggested, and the rationale is in the report.
Move the list.
Moved and seconded. Any questions from Ms. Carter or any of our other staff in regards to these expenditures? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. We skip item 16. There's no correspondence to be received. Given the late hour, we were going to be careful as to keep everything succinct under the new business and verbal reports. Any verbal reports on new business?
I'm just going to give a notice of motion. I'm going to just ask, and I'll work with staff on the wording of this, to bring back the notion of fires on the beach. Just the fires and beach bylaw reminded me of this. It came before council some years ago. We had a report from the fire chief at the time. I think it's worth bringing back again for this summer to consider it.
Sorry.
It's a notice of motion, essentially.
It's a notice of motion that you wish to have a report from the fire chief?
No. The notice of motion that I'm going to bring back the fires on the beach bylaw question.
Okay. And I think typically we'd kind of agreed that there was going to be a bit of a protocol for new projects. This may qualify for that protocol. So we'll take your notice of motion and we'll just get you to look into that protocol. Okay, Councillor Croft.
At the tourism meeting last Thursday, they provided us with a tourism snapshot, and I only brought one, but I'd be willing to get more if other councillors were interested in having this at their fingertips.
Yeah, so send it around, or physical copy it around. That'd be good either way. That's good, thank you. Any other reports? No. Any other reports? Seeing none, move on to the bylaw. We have a memorandum there and under 18, which sets out what 19 and 20 are. So the first one is the building and plumbing bylaw.
Move adoption, bylaw 4679.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Now the next one is the parks and beaches, and we have an explanation for this, and essentially it's delegating some of the authority for certain decisions, just to, and it was part of our streamlining process. Thank you.
I'll move first reading of the Parks and Beaches bylaw 2017.
Moved and
No, sorry, that's not the bylaw number, that's the year. There's no bylaw number there.
4672.
4672, sorry, it doesn't say that there.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded, first reading. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed.
And second reading? Bylaw 467.
You don't have to say that. I think we know which one it is.
Seconded.
Same mover and seconder. Discussion. No discussion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And third reading, same mover and seconder.
Third reading, yeah.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much, everybody.
Was it the final reading of that? Well, this plumbing bylaw. Was that I thought we had to do the second.